Chapter 428. The word traitor was actually not appropriate, or perhaps not accurate enough. In this story, it was more appropriate to call it a spy or something else. For example, the following words that broke the silence of the crowd. Qin Changxing, you scoundrel! You actually colluded with the demons to kill the talents of Mount Li, and now you even forced young master Huan Yu to death. Forced to death? I think some powerful figure used some shameful method. This is a shameless murder. Too shameful. What nonsense are you spouting? After viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books, Qin Changxing was no longer the target of hostility and hatred of the people of the capital. Many people had already begun to treat him as the glory of the great Zhou. Some people loudly criticized Qin Changxing, and naturally, there were even louder people who defended him. For a moment, the streets of the capital were filled with the sounds of quarreling and bustling with noise. Qin Changxing looked at the curtains and listened to the noise outside the carriage in shock. On the road, he had finally learned of all the details of what had happened outside the garden of Zhou through Hua Jifu. He had originally thought that after returning to the capital, the first thing he would do would be to confront Zhuang Huanyu. Who would have thought that last night Zhuang Huanyu would actually die? The noise outside the carriage grew louder and louder. The quarrels of the crowd grew fiercer and fiercer, their words sharper and sharper. It was noisy and vexing. Qin Changxing wanted to say something, but in the end he said nothing. He lowered his head in silence, his eyelashes trembling. The childishness on his face was finally about to disappear. Whether it was the cheers of the crowd or the accusations of the crowd, Qin Changxing returned to the capital under the gaze of countless people of the capital. Only when the convoy drove into the depths of Hundred Flowers Lane did the world outside the window finally calm down. With Li Palace clergy guarding the perimeter of the Hundred Blossom Lane, no one was able to approach. Qin Changxing looked at Orthodox academies, still very new gate, and the green vines that were still very old. Feeling the solemn and quiet atmosphere that came from all around, he felt a little uncomfortable. One day of viewing the monoliths of the front mausoleum, one night of starlight bathing the capital. It had not been too long since the Pope had established his position as the successor of the Orthodoxy. Moreover, after leaving the mausoleum of books, he had entered the garden of Zhou. The days in the plains of the unsetting sun felt like years. What followed next was the 10,000 li of snowy plains. He had been in such a hurry to escape that he had no time, nor did he have the opportunity to experience any changes. Now he felt like a lifetime had passed. Many things had changed. The Orthodox Academy that had once been surrounded by countless enraged commoners of the capital was now a place that ordinary people simply could not approach. Although it was still far from recovering its former glory, its atmosphere was completely new. Fortunately, there were still many things that had not changed. Jin Lu was still standing in front of the Tradition Academy's gate. The silk robe that he was wearing, which was covered with patterns of copper coins, was still as smooth as water. Xian Yuanpa was still as mighty and majestic as ever. His arms were thicker than trees. When he hugged Xian Yuanpa, Jin Lu always felt like he was being swallowed. Luo Luo was still Luo Luo. She entered his embrace like a cool breeze, her hands wrapped around his neck, her forehead rubbing against his chin, a satisfied smile on her face. Standing on the great banyan tree by the lake, Qin Changxing and Luo Luo talked for a very long time. He told the little girl everything that had happened in the Garden of Zhou, as well as everything that had happened on their journey south, without missing a single detail. That elf girl, was she very beautiful? Luo Luo only cared about this. She widened her eyes, looked at Qin Changxing, and asked curiously. There were so many things. There was a grand battle, there was a conspiracy and assassination, there was a sword that traveled 10,000 miles, there was an unsheathing of 10,000 swords, there was an iron blade that broke through the wind and rain. Luo Luo only cared about these. Chen Chongsheng naturally could not forget that girl called Chen Chujian, but he suddenly realized that he could not clearly remember her appearance. For some reason, he felt a chill run through his body, as if he was losing something. Luo Luo could sense the change in his mood. She looked at him sympathetically and grabbed his sleeve. She softly said, "Teacher, don't worry. I'll think of a way to have someone investigate." The journey from Xuanyang City to the capital was very long. There was a lot of time, besides clearing his memories and preparing for the capital. Qin Chongsheng naturally did not forget to ask the people of the Orthodoxy to help find the whereabouts of Lady Chujian. However, neither the priests of the Li Palace nor the people of Hanzhou City could confirm that there was such a girl among the ethereal opening cultivators that had entered the garden of Zhou. Thus, it was naturally even more impossible to confirm that she had survived. Hearing Luolua's words, Qin Chongsheng felt a little more at ease. The elves had a very close relationship with White Emperor City and the Great Western Continent. Luolua's mother was the eldest princess of the Great Western Continent, and her father was the White Emperor of the demi-humans. It should be more convenient for her to ask someone to investigate. Luo added, "Zhuang Huanyu is dead." She had long forgotten that when she was studying in the Heavenly Tao Academy, she had once seen the genius classmate of hers in Principal Mao's garden. She only mentioned it now because she was worried that Zhuang Huanyu's death would bring trouble to her teacher. Chen Chongsheng was quiet for a while, then said, "I know." Luo added, "Teacher, I went to the Imperial Palace twice to have them release Shishio, but I didn't succeed." Chen Chongsheng rubbed her head and smiled. "So you're to blame?" Luo rubbed her head against his palm. She had a tiger's head and was very cute. The sunlight fell on the spring lake and then reflected off the branches of the great banyan tree, transforming into countless motes of light that could change shape at any time. One of these motes fell on Chen Chongsheng's face. Luo stared at this mote of light and began to giggle. She was very happy because her teacher did not blame her, nor did he thank her. In order to make her happy, he even copied her words. Following that, Chen Chongsheng used an hour and 3 large buckets of hot water to clean himself from head to toe. Then, he and Luo went to the Li Palace. The Pope was waiting for him in the Li Palace. It was not the Great Hall of Light, but that quiet side hall. The light in the hall was very dim. Only the tender green of the green leaf in the pot leapt into one's eyes. Then he saw the divine staff carelessly placed on the wall, saw that clear pond and that magnificent crystal throne, as well as that indescribable yin-yang crown on the throne. Finally, he saw that old man dressed in hemp garments. Different from the fanatical worship of the believers of the world, the Supreme Pope seemed just like an ordinary old man. He was not even as eye-catching as those external objects like the divine staff or the divine crown. Seeing the Pope's back as he watered the green leaf, Chen Chongsheng's thoughts were somewhat disorderly. Everyone knew that he was the Pope's chosen successor, and some powerful figures even knew that he was the Pope's martial nephew. To put it another way, he had always been the Pope's sole successor in this world. But the problem was that he had only met the Pope twice. He was truly not familiar with the Pope, and it was even more difficult to say that he was close. The Pope took out a handkerchief and wiped his hands, then turned around and smiled at him. "I remember that Su Li is very fond of gourmet food. Following him, did you eat anything good?" The Pope's expression was clearly so amiable, his voice so gentle, as if an elder was asking a junior who had returned from a long journey. And in order to not make the junior too nervous, he had asked a very trivial question at the beginning. But Chen Chongsheng felt as if a great mountain that spanned across the heavens and earth was pressing down on him. From the snowy plains of the land of demons to Xuanyang City, many people wanted to kill Su Li. Behind those people stood a lofty figure that seemed like a god. It was the Pope. But Su Li had survived, to a large extent, because of Chen Chongsheng. Thus, he could not help but think that the Pope's words had some hidden meaning. So he could not help but be nervous. This nervousness is probably the nervousness of paying respects to my father-in-law. Tomorrow there will be 2 chapters. Chapter 429. In the eyes of the common people, the Pope's trust and love towards Chen Changsheng was at its peak, even somewhat baffling. Logically speaking, Chen Changsheng should naturally act according to the Pope's will, but in reality, from the military stronghold to Sunyang City, Chen Changsheng had done many things that went against the Pope's will. No matter how one looked at it, the Pope should have been very disappointed, or at least asked for a reason. The Pope did not ask. He calmly looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "It's really hard to imagine that my senior brother would raise a student like you." Chen Changsheng was stunned. He suddenly realized that his impression of his master was actually very vague. Just what sort of person was his master? In the Pope's view, what sort of student should he raise? He did not know the answer, but he was very sure that the Pope's words were correct, because he had never been raised by his master. He had been raised by his senior brother. Thinking of Xining Village's old temple, the fog behind the mountain, and those voices within the fog, and his senior brother and the wildflowers, he was somewhat entranced. The Pope looked at him and calmly smiled, thinking to himself, at this sort of time, anyone would be nervous, but this little fellow actually had the leisure to think of other things truly extraordinary. "Sit," he said to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng grunted, very obediently sitting on the chair, not leaning against the back of the chair, nor deliberately only touching his buttocks. In short, he was truly obedient, without any deliberate actions. The Pope pointed at the teapot. Chen Changsheng understood, picked up the teapot and filled the teacup in front of the Pope, thought a little, then filled the teacup in front of him, then began to wander again, because he thought of those 2 nights in the 100-herb garden, that little table, that woman who sat across from him and drank tea without saying a word. The Pope put down the teacup and casually said, "Tell me about the garden of Zhou." He spoke casually, and what he wanted to hear was also casually said, because one thing was certain. The garden of Zhou did not have Su Li. In the garden of Zhou, I met a girl, Chen Changsheng subconsciously said. The Pope was startled and asked him. Only then did Chen Changsheng wake up from his stupor. He felt his face heat up and hurriedly recounted the events of the garden of Zhou in detail. From the moment he obtained the yellow paper umbrella from the Wunshui Tangs, all the way to Zhou Dufu's mausoleum, he basically left nothing out. Only a few details that had nothing to do with the major events, such as the girl. He naturally did not mention them. Furthermore, for some unknown reason, he did not mention the having blade style in the mausoleum of Zhou, or those lost heavenly tome monoliths. Sunlight seeped through the eaves of the hall and fell on the smooth, jade-like floor, illuminating the floor into many squares, like a chessboard. The Pope sat in his chair and looked at the ground in silence for a long time. The mausoleum of Zhou, the heaven-shrouding sword, the yellow paper umbrella, Mount Li, the sword pool, the monster tide, this story that spanned several hundred years, the destiny between the 2 worlds, even he could not help but sigh ruefully. So, the sword pool is the sword sea, the plains of the unsetting sun. That person's grave is also inside. The Pope's voice resounded in the quiet hall. As the supreme saint of the human world, his grasp of this world far surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. But only today did he realize that the plains he had once seen many years ago actually concealed so many secrets. The black nightmare sarcophagus in the mausoleum of Zhou is empty. Chen Changsheng naturally would not forget this very important detail. The Pope smiled in silence. That person's life and death were a mystery to many people, but time was still the most powerful thing in the world. At this point in time, he no longer cared much about it. In comparison, the Pope was more concerned about other matters. In that case, those swords are all in your hands. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Changsheng took the dagger from his waist and offered it up with both hands. Back in the Plum Garden Inn, Tang 36 had wanted to take his dagger, but had been refused. But now he could not refuse because the Pope was the Pope and also his martial uncle. The fact that the swords in the sword pool were in his hands was also impossible to conceal. Back in the wilderness, when he fought with divine General Shui He, those swords had already appeared. Do you know what this sheath is? The Pope did not take the dagger, but looked at him and asked. Chun Chongqing shook his head. The Pope was somewhat sorrowful, saying, this was the Orthodox Academy's cornerstone treasure. Later on, it disappeared amidst that blood and fire. As it turns out, it was taken away by your master. Qin Chongqing didn't know what to say. Senior and I were schoolmates and also from the same sect. Now that I think about it, his talent in cultivation and intelligence have always been far above mine. But in the end, it was I who inherited the position of Pope and he who went to the Orthodox Academy to become principal. The Pope gazed at the sky outside the hall, the sea of stars in his eyes slowly appearing and disappearing, like clouds in time. Because his obsession was too strong. Don't learn from him. Chen Chongqing still didn't know what to say. Even today, he still did not know the true inside story of the Orthodox Academy. Even if he knew, he still had no right to speak. What about those swords in the sword pool? The Li Palace will send out an edict to the world. Those sects that still have descendants, first register them and then return the swords to them. As for those sects whose lineage has already been severed, those swords will be for your own safekeeping. Chen Chongqing understood that with this arrangement, after the Mausoleum of Books, he could be considered to have performed a great service for the human world. The criticism brought about by the deaths of Liang Shaoxiao and Zhuang Huanyu would be greatly alleviated. He said, everything will be as your holiness has arranged. He did not respectfully address him as your holiness, did not pull on his sleeve and call him martial uncle, only softly saying, your holiness was already some sort of progress that allowed him to finally return to the natural and intimate world of his sect. The Pope was very satisfied. He said to him, go, have a good rest. Seeing his expression, the Pope understood what he was worried about and said, Zhixia will come out very quickly. From start to finish, the Pope had not asked him a single question about Su Li returning to the capital for the first time. How could he have a good rest? Leaving the Li Palace, he could not return to the Orthodox Academy, nor could he visit Zhixia. So Chen Chongqing was taken by Priest Exan to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. The row of red maple trees should have been like fire, but in the late spring and early summer, they were a dense green that surpassed jade. It was as if the building behind the maple trees had the dual identity of the Imperial Court's educational institution and the Orthodoxy's Hall of Cultural Glory. In the deepest part of the hall, in that room filled with plum blossoms, Melisha sat behind a table, his eyes closed as if he was not asleep. The age spots on his face were even more distinct, just like the rouge plum on the table. Chen Chongqing stood in front of the table, separated by the rouge plum, looking at the Archbishop with a rather complex mood. Compared to the Pope, Archbishop Melisha did not have any relationship with him. Logically, he should have been even more unfamiliar with him. But for some reason, he had always felt that the Archbishop had treated him extremely well. Whether it was the grand examination or the garden of Zhou, Archbishop Melisha had provided him with far too much assistance and convenience. Although there were times when these matters would make him feel rather pressured, the true reason for his complex mood was not this, but that the Archbishop was growing old. Chen Chongqing did not know what level of cultivation Archbishop Melisha was at, but based on his qualifications and influence in the orthodoxy that could rival the Pope, as well as the attitude of Zhu Luo and the others towards him, he should be able to guess that he was not far from the divine domain. Priests of this level were the same as other cultivators. It was very common for them to live past 800 years. In this endless period of time, even if experts of profound cultivation gradually grew old, they would only have a few wrinkles on their faces and beards. They would definitely not show any signs of weakness or old age. Only at the final stage of their lives would they consider the question of descendants, leave behind a bloodline, and then rapidly age at an unimaginable speed. Death like the quiet beauty of an autumn leaf. No, it was more like a fruit falling from a fierce gale. In this 1 year, The entire continent knew that Archbishop Melisha was growing old. This signified that the archbishop's days in this world were numbered. At any moment, he could return to the sea of stars. The rouge plum blossom was so gorgeous. The plum blossoms in the room did not seem to be in the depths of spring, but rather any time of the 4 seasons, any time of the year when the plum blossoms were in full bloom. Compared to the room filled with flowers, the archbishop's old age was all the more startling. Chun Changsheng felt somewhat sad. Just at this moment, the archbishop opened his eyes, smiled at him, and said, "Come here." Chun Changsheng obeyed and walked in front of him. Melisha looked at him and sighed ruefully. "Knowing that you are still alive, I am very happy, but at the same time I also feel somewhat sad." Chun Changsheng did not understand these words, but for some reason he suddenly felt a great deal of unease, even fear. Since Su Li is not dead, then I still have to withdraw my gaze and place it on the capital, just like how you still have to return to the capital in the end. Melisha said, "The Boiling Stone Summit is next year. I don't know if I can still see it, but I can at least finish watching you for this year." Chun Changsheng wanted to say some words of comfort, but he realized that he was not good at it. Somewhat remorsefully, he lowered his head. Melisha calmly looked at him and said, "This year is very important to you." Chun Changsheng said, "I don't understand." "You have to mature as quickly as possible." After saying this, Melisha's expression became somewhat heavy, his eyes somewhat gloomy, but then they became as bright as ever. "Believe me, in the end, you and we will obtain victory." Chun Changsheng truly did not understand. He thought to himself, with whom is this battle? With the Divine Empress? Even if it is, what strength do I have to participate in a battle of this level? The problem between the Orthodoxy and the Empress is still that position in the imperial palace. With some difficulty, Melisha stood up and brought Chun Changsheng to the window. Gazing in the direction of the nearby imperial palace, he said, "In this battle, you will play an extremely important role." Chun Changsheng said, "Just because I am teacher's student? Because I represent the attitude of supporting the imperial clan?" Melisha ruefully said, "Of course, it's not just this." The archbishop did not give a more detailed explanation, because this matter was very difficult to explain, perhaps even impossible to explain. It was also because, at this moment, the door to the room was knocked on at just the right time. After the door was pushed open, a person that Chun Changsheng had not expected to appeared. Before 8 o'clock in the next chapter. Chapter 430. The person who came was Prince Chun Lu, the only representative of the Chun imperial family in the capital, and also the only junior that the divine queen could accept. Prince Chun Lu's reputation in the capital had always been excellent. He was thought to be as gentle as jade, but also very courageous. Back then, this young prince had helped Chun Changsheng and the Tradition Academy twice. So Chun Changsheng had a very good impression of him. But for some reason, Tang 36 didn't like him. Prince Chun Lu bowed to the archbishop, then looked at Chun Changsheng and smiled. "Don't you think this meeting is a bit too early?" Melisha didn't care about the hidden meaning of these words, and directly said, "The Orthodoxy wants the queen to express her attitude as soon as possible. The people of the Tianhai family naturally won't agree. Tianhai Xingxue is a smart person, but not everyone in his family has his wisdom. Even if they do, they will be crushed by the throne that seems to be within their reach. After all, not everyone can resist that kind of temptation." Prince Chun Lu said seriously, "As members of the Chun imperial family, I and my brothers from the counties will act righteously." These 2 words were both said to Chun Changsheng. The Orthodoxy has always stood behind the imperial family. It has always been like this since the time of Emperor Taizu. Melisha continued, "It is still the same now, but because of Zhuang Huanyu's death, there might be some problems on the side of the Heavenly Academy. Among the 6 archbishops, there are still 2 that haven't changed because the Pope changed too quickly." Chen Chongqing thought to himself, if this is the case, then what happened in the Tradition Academy a dozen years ago? Why did the Pope support the Divine Queen for so many years? He understood that this was an analysis of the current situation, but he still didn't understand what he could do. What was the meaning of the Archbishop arranging for him to meet with Prince Qinlu? Mei Li Sha's next words revealed the answer to the riddle, but it was a new riddle. For both Chen Chongsheng and Prince Qinlu, who heard this, it was the same. Your Highness, please remember what Chen Chongsheng has sacrificed in the future. Prince Qinlu listened thoughtfully, but he couldn't think of anything. Chen Chongsheng couldn't think of anything, so he thought of something else and asked, what about Zhixiu? The Pope said that Zhixiu would come out soon, but he was still very worried. Zhixiu was still in the great prison. He couldn't imagine what kind of terrible torture the Wolf Clan youth had endured during this period of time. Mei Lisha said, if the imperial court still doesn't release him, in a few days, I will personally pay a visit. Prince Qinlu looked at him and said apologetically, on the second day after Zhixiu was imprisoned, I handed over my name card, but you also know that this prince doesn't have much influence in front of Lord Zhou Tong. Standing among the maple trees overflowing with spring, Chen Chongqing gazed in the rumored direction of Zhou Prison, then in the direction of the Mausoleum of Books, and finally in the direction of the Imperial Palace and the Li Palace. He sighed. He wasn't an ordinary youth, but he was still a youth in the end. There are some things in the world that were too complicated and too heavy for him to bear. It was even to the extent that he found it difficult to breathe. Compared to the capital, he actually felt that the storm in Xuanyang City was a little more refreshing and direct. He would rather stand together with that blade and simply do a few things, even if those things were not simple. Under the humble gazes of the priests, he left the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. He did not return to the Orthodox Academy, but instead went to the market to buy some food. Afterwards, he went to New North Bridge. Borrowing the flash of the setting sun, his body became illusory, and he jumped into that dried-up well. The underground space was still bone-chilling, but the black dragon was sleeping. Its massive body, like that of a mountain range, quietly lay on the ground. The chain was still rusted to death in the stone wall. Chen Chongqing took out the meat and placed them on lotus leaves in front of the black dragon. Finally, he took the rui from his waist and placed it on the ground. The black dragon's spiritual soul was still sleeping in the rui, and it was unknown when it would wake up. After doing all this, he thought it over, then wrote a few words on the frost on the ground and left. Leaving the pond, his body was drenched. After changing into the dry clothes that he had prepared, he once more saw the black goat in the courtyard of the imperial palace. He smiled, bent his knees, and hugged it affectionately. He completely disregarded the black goat's slightly raised head and its unwilling appearance. There was a gust of wind. The chill was still there, but it was driven several dozen zhang away. The lotus leaves on the frost regained their tender green, and the fresh meat once more began to emit heat. The Tianhai Divine Empress held her hands behind her back and lowered her head to read the words that Chen Chongqing had just left on the frost. A mocking smile appeared on her lips. She did not even glance at it. With a slight push of her spiritual sense, the jade rui returned to her waist. The spiritual soul of the black dragon thus awoke, transforming into a clear and cold intent. Through the red mole between its brows, it returned to the dragon's body. The dragon's eyes slowly opened, snow rustling down. The mountainous dragon body began to shrink with unimaginable speed, ultimately transforming into that black-clothed girl. However, the coldness on its face had already been greatly diluted by that cinnabar mole. Do you see? Men are all fickle and lacking in loyalty. The Tianhai Divine Empress jeered at her. The black-clothed girl saw those words. After a moment of silence, she said, "He doesn't know when I'll wake up. He has something to do, so he naturally leaves first. Moreover, he doesn't know that I'm a girl. You are a female dragon," the Tianhai Divine Empress calmly said. What meaning is there in letting him know this fact? The black-clothed girl was very angry, the baleful aura on her brow greatly increasing. The temperature of the underground space rapidly dropped. The Tian High Divine Empress did not care. The area several dozen zhang in circumference around her was still as warm as spring, and the ground by her feet even began to emit specks of green. In the world above the well, it was already early summer. At dusk, there was a hint of summer heat. Business in the distant ice shop had improved, but this place was very cold and cheerless because there were many guards scattered around, and also because of the two terrifying snow mastiffs under the trees and grass. Mou held the rope in her hand and quietly waited. When the Divine Empress's figure reappeared, she immediately walked over and said, "Prince Chen-Lu also went to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education." The Divine Empress glanced at her and asked, "What do you want to say?" Mou replied, "I don't understand. Even if Qin Changxing is Taoist Ji student, how could he be worthy of the orthodoxy's attention? Could it be some sort of smoke screen?" This sort of incomprehension was a question that she, as a subject and advisor, had to immediately raise, but perhaps she herself did not realize it. This would also cause the Empress to lower her guard against Chen Changxing. The Divine Empress said the actions of the orthodoxy's people are best for them to deliberately mystify things. There is no need to pay attention to them. After saying this, she walked towards the imperial city. The two snow mastiffs silently left the tree and followed behind her. Looking at the Empress's back, Mou smiled bitterly, thinking, if there really is no need to pay attention, then why did the Empress follow Qin Changxing right after he came to see the Black Dragon? Her incomprehension was because she did not know of the agreement between the Divine Empress and the Black Dragon, did not know of the existence of the Jade Rui. Returning to the imperial palace, she looked at the pond in front of her and thought that Chen Changxing should have come out from here. The Divine Empress then thought of that night, even earlier, the scene of Chen Changxing emerging from the pond for the first time. The youth did not care that he was in the dangerous depths of the imperial palace. Seeing a flower pot knocked over by a startled squirrel about to injure a woman, he charged over. A mocking smile appeared on the Divine Empress's face again, but it always felt like a senior mocking a junior. Her spirit slightly moved. The Jade Rui left her belt and floated above the pond. The water in the pond moved as if it was boiling, giving rise to a lot of mist. A ray of light shot out from the Jade Rui and fell on the mist. The scene gradually became clearer. It was the scene that the Black Dragon saw after leaving the capital with Qin Changxing. Later on, her soul often slept in the Rui, and when the Rui was tied to Qin Changxing's waist or wrist, it would also record the scene. Looking at the scene, the Divine Empress became quieter and quieter. Her smile did not disappear, but the mocking intent decreased a lot. What was left was some kind of interest. The scene flipped quickly and gradually became flowing light. It was many times faster than the normal speed of time. Only a saint like her could see it clearly. When the golden phoenix wings lit up the night sky and the scene of the heavily injured girl in white appeared, the Divine Empress raised her eyebrows. For the first time, she expressed some kind of concern. Su Yurong was her most beloved junior. Although she disguised herself, it could not be hidden from her eyes. In the following scene, Su Yurong and Chen Changxing met, but they did not recognize each other. She smiled without saying a word, probably finding it very interesting. Finally, she saw the unsetting sun at the edge of the plains, the wild tide of monsters, Su Yurong's inseparability, Qin Changxing's unabandonment, and that person's mausoleum. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. She silently gazed at the mausoleum of Zhou in the scene. After an unknown amount of time, the scene darkened and everything disappeared without a trace. She lightly waved her hand, returning the scene to the place where Su Yurong and Chen Changxing first met, which was also the place where the misunderstanding began. That place was on the Reed Island by the lake. The two met but did not recognize each other. The Rui could not record Su Yurong's thoughts, but the divine empress clearly knew what she was thinking at the time. Why was it that after that, she never connected the unconscious fellow with Chen Chongsheng, who was on the other side of the engagement? No matter who looked at it, Chen Chongsheng did not seem like a 15-year-old youth. He was too calm and steady, even when he was unconscious. At the time, when Su Yurong glanced over, she felt that this person was around 20 years old. Then, how could he be Chen Chongsheng? The divine empress stood by the pond for a very long time, thinking about something. Suddenly, she looked at Su Yurong in the scene and said, "So you also felt that he did not seem like a 15-year-old youth?" The night wind rustled the grass. At some point, a chief eunuch had arrived outside the hall. She asked, "How is it?" The chief eunuch reported in a low voice, "There are no new clues in the case." Lord Zhou Tong also did not discover anything in Xining village. Only that mad lord who of the imperial astronomer still insists that Crown Prince Xiaoming is not dead. He had followed the divine empress for several hundred years and experienced countless great events. Yet when he mentioned the words of that mad lord who, his voice still began to tremble uncontrollably. The divine empress gazed at the place in the night sky where a certain star should have been. For a very long time, she did not speak. The title of this chapter was decided upon together with the leader, slightly praising. Chapter 431. The Crown Prince was the natural successor to the throne. If the great Zhou had a crown prince, perhaps the conflict between the orthodoxy and the divine empress would not have developed to its current level. The situation on the continent would have been much calmer. In reality, the great Zhou truly did once have a crown prince. He was the son of Emperor Xian and the divine empress, Crown Prince Xiaoming. Alas, none of the successive crown princes of the great Zhou had a good ending. The crown prince that Taizu had established died tragically in the coup of the 100-Her Garden, and the crown prince that Emperor Taizong had meticulously raised was ultimately executed for some inexplicable rebellion. This crown prince Xiaoming's fate was also very unfortunate, but it could also be said that he was relatively lucky because he had already died when he was very young. Not long after Emperor Xian's death, Crown Prince Xiaoming died of illness in his swaddling clothes, but no one believed it. Of course, no one believed it. The bloodline of the imperial clan and the divine empress was compatible. So how could it be a premature child? As for the cause of Crown Prince Xiaoming's death, there were countless theories. There was one that was the most widespread. Back then, the Chen imperial clan allied with the orthodoxy's old powers, intending to drive the divine empress from the throne. In that soul-stirring struggle, the divine empress and the pope obtained the final victory. Several hundred nobles of the Chen imperial clan were either executed or exiled, and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were nearly wiped out. All that was left were the desolate, frosty grass and broken wells and crumbling walls. However, the divine empress had also paid an enormous price for this. In that rebellion, Crown Prince Xiaoming was poisoned to death by the divine empress's enemies. There was another theory that was also extremely widespread, but it could not be heard in tea houses or inns. It could only be restlessly spread in the dark. This theory was even crueler, even more callous. There were people who believed, and even secretly spread, that several hundred years ago, the divine empress was expelled from the imperial palace by Emperor Taizong and spent her days in misery in the 100-Herb Garden. She became acquainted with the Pope and the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy and learned of the secret of defying the heavens and changing fate. She swore to the starry sky that she was willing to sever her bloodline in exchange for defying the heavens and changing fate. The death of Crown Prince Xiaoming was the curse of her defying the heavens and changing fate, or perhaps the wrath of the heavens. It was even possible that it was something that she had done on her own initiative in order to defy the heavens and change fate. In those dark rumors, the narrators seem to have seen with their own eyes that bloody and frightening scene in the imperial palace. They described it vividly, how the divine empress's hand passed through the swaddling clothes and extended towards the incessantly crying infant. There was no expression on her beautiful and dignified face, but a single tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. Then the crying gradually quieted, and the silence of the night palace made one's heart palpitate. If the divine empress had triggered the wrath of the heavens when she defied the heavens and changed her fate, causing her to end her line and die alone, the heavenly Tao and the sea of stars were truly too cruel and terrifying. If the divine empress, in order to change her fate, had personally killed her only son and wanted to become a loner on this continent, then she was a little too callous and terrifying. Regardless of the explanation, Crown Prince Xiaoming was already dead. He had died for a cruel and terrifying reason, his death very innocent and pitiful. From then on, no one dared to mention this matter, not the Chan imperial clan or the people of the orthodoxy. Only that insane imperial astronomer who, even though Zhou Tong had plucked out all his fingernails, still used his blood-stained mouth to tell the world that Crown Prince Xiaoming was not dead. Then, just when Zhou Tong was prepared to pluck out this lord whose tongue, the divine empress showed her benevolence and allowed Lord Hu to return to his hometown to rest. But in the view of many people, this was not benevolence, but a guilty conscience, or perhaps a form of self-consolation. Just what had happened in the imperial palace back then. Just how had Crown Prince Xiaoming died? Why had the empress felt guilty? Thus, that cruel and terrifying explanation spread even more widely. Of course, it was still spread deep into the night. The imperial palace was very quiet at night, but the night of early summer was infinitely cold. The chief eunuch lowered his head, not even daring to glance at the divine empress. The quiet courtyard instantly transformed into a frigid plain of snow. Not a single snowflake could be seen, but a thin layer of ice gradually began to form on the surface of the pond. A saint's thoughts moved the heavens and earth. Their emotions surged, creating raging waves. Their moods were gloomy, and the curtain of night hung over the sky. Their moods were gloomy yet violent, and naturally wind and snow covered the sky. Just when the chief eunuch felt like his sea of consciousness was about to be frozen and split apart, the divine empress's voice finally rang out once more. Her voice was very calm, very light, like the water in a pond beneath a thin layer of ice. All the people of the world are my sons. The Prince of Xiang and the Elephant King are also my sons. Xiaoming's life and death have never been important. It had never been important, so it was possible that it had never been important. The chief eunuch lowered his head even more, as if his head was about to touch the cold ground. He gradually retreated into the darkness. A black goat slowly walked over from outside the garden, its fur as glossy and pitch-black as jade. As it walked out of the darkness, it seemed to bring with it a part of the darkness. Was everything covered up by the darkness the truth? Then what about the darkness itself? The divine empress impassively asked it, then what about you? Why are you willing to get close to him? Just who is he? Tonight was Chen Chongqing's first night after returning to the Orthodox Academy. Just like on the previous nights, after eating dinner and taking a stroll along the lake, he very naturally walked into the library. Luo Luo had returned to the Li Palace. Tang 36 was still in the mausoleum of books. Xian Yuanpo was smashing trees, and Jishio was still in Zhou prison. He didn't know what he should do, so he just continued cultivating. The starlight pierced through the glass, and the snowflakes pierced through the sparse leaves. They did not stop on his clothes or skin, but directly entered into the depths of his body. The layer of snow on the plains grew thicker and thicker. Although the lake outside the Spirit Mountain was still far from becoming a vast ocean, the flow of water had already increased significantly. The stone gate of the ethereal palace at the end of the sloping stone steps in the mountain had already been completely opened. Calm and gentle rays of light seeped out from the cave and scattered everywhere in the water, giving off a very peaceful feeling. The current him would naturally not be as perplexed as before, thinking that all the starlight had gone elsewhere. He quietly sensed his own star in the distant starry sky, sensed the changes in his body. Time slowly passed. At some point, he opened his eyes and woke up. He began to sort through his gains from the past few days. When he left the mausoleum of books, he was already at the upper level of ethereal opening. After his journey to the Garden of Zhou and his encounter with so many powerful foes on his journey south, his sword heart was gradually becoming more complete and his cultivation was even more stable. He was even faintly on the verge of climbing to the peak of ethereal opening. Coupled with the fact that he had followed Su Li for so long, his progress in swordplay was even greater. With the two added together, he could be said to be invincible under the star condensation realm. Even if he encountered those experts who had just entered the star condensation realm, he still had a chance of defeating them. This fact made him feel somewhat gratified, but he would not relax in the slightest, because he had never forgotten that night. He truly did not have much time. Even if he could be said to be the fastest person in history to reach the peak of ethereal opening, there was still an endless distance from the distant, concealed divinity realm. Just how much more time would he need? As a result, he had to treasure his time. After concluding his meditation, purification, and meditation, he immediately began to practice his swordplay. The snowy plains and the lake water in his body indicated that he had already accumulated an extremely large amount of true essence, far surpassing that of ordinary cultivators of the same age. The problem was that his meridians were broken, so he could not completely utilize that true essence. The blazing sword that Su Li had taught him could only resolve a portion of this problem, and the price that the blazing sword had to pay was far too great. With his current level of cultivation, he could only use 3 strikes at most. Moreover, the blazing sword could not be practiced. It was harmful to the body. The intellectual sword could not be practiced either. It was harmful to the mind. He could only practice the stupid sword. He stood on the floor, constantly drawing the sword, holding it horizontally, and constantly repeating this simple and tedious process. It truly did seem rather clumsy. After finishing 1,000 times, he once more sat down cross-legged and sent his spiritual sense into the sheath. In the world of the sheath, there were 10,000 broken swords calmly floating in the air, not disturbing each other. These swords no longer possessed the power they had when they had first appeared in the Garden of Zhou, but they were still divine swords whose names had once shaken the continent. Their sword intents were still powerful, and the seemingly empty space had long since been occupied by sword intents. His spiritual sense, passing through the 10,000 sword intents, was actually a very dangerous matter, especially since he was not attempting to use his spiritual sense to control the 10,000 swords, but to directly use his spiritual sense to interact with the 10,000 swords. He wanted to use the sword intents of the 10,000 swords to sharpen his sword heart. His sword heart was already perfectly fused. If others were to know of this, they would assuredly sigh in shock and praise, because this was an extremely difficult matter. Taking another step forward was the true enlightened sword heart. However, the enlightened sword heart required too much talent in the path of the sword. Across the entire continent, there were only a few people who could achieve the true enlightened sword heart. The problem was that in this period of time, Chen Changsheng had only met 2 people who had achieved the enlightened sword heart, Su Li and Lady Chu Jian, so he naturally could not be satisfied. Those sword intents were the whetstones, and his spiritual sense was the edge of the sword. The sword intents, whether sharp or tyrannical, constantly touched, grinded, and cut against his spiritual sense. This process was very painful. He closed his eyes and did not sweat, but his face gradually paled. The edge of a treasured sword was sharpened, and the fragrance of a plum blossom came from the bitter cold. Without experiencing the wind and rain, how could one see the rainbow? He thought of the famous sayings of his predecessors and endured the unimaginable pain, all the way until that strand of spiritual sense that had entered the sheath grew thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker. As if it could dissipate at any moment, suddenly he sensed that behind the 10,000 sword intents, there was something that was attracting his spiritual sense. The moment he sensed that attractive force, his originally weak and gradually dissipating spiritual sense suddenly became much more stable, once more powerful. His spiritual sense passed through the 10,000 sword intents and slowly drifted into the distance. After some time, the light boat finally passed through the 10,000 mountains, and his spiritual sense arrived at the other shore of the ocean of sword intents. The shore of the ocean of sword intents turned out to be a real shore. On the shore was a black stone monolith, but it was not a real monolith, only a phantom. The black monolith was rather familiar, just like the darkness of the night. The moment he saw the black monolith, Chen Chongqing naturally had a feeling that this monolith shadow should be a door that led to another place. What world was on the other side of the black monolith? What was behind the darkness of the night? Suddenly he remembered. The reason why this black monolith was familiar was not because he could see it every night, but because this black monolith was exactly the same as the heavenly tome monolith that he had obtained from Wang Jitsa in the pavilion of ascending mist. It was also the same as the heavenly tome monoliths around the mausoleum of Zhou. Could it be that this black monolith led to the Garden of Zhou? Could it be that the Garden of Zhou had still not been destroyed? There will be a second chapter, but it will be much later. Chapter 432. Thinking of the plain in the Garden of Zhou, the Sunset Valley, and the Taoist scriptures and old objects lost in the lake, Chen Chongqing was both astonished and pleasantly surprised. When he came out of the Garden of Zhou, he had no idea what had happened. Looking at it from another angle, he had no idea how he had left the Garden of Zhou and suddenly appeared in the snowy plains of the demon realm tens of thousands of li away. Because he did not know about the metal plate in Black Robe's hand, he had no idea what had happened in the Garden of Zhou afterwards. He had only heard about it from Hua Jifu and the others on the road. If the Garden of Zhou had not been destroyed, did that not mean that the heavenly tome monolith stolen by Zhou Dufu could see the light of day again? Yes, the most important and most precious object in the Garden of Zhou was not the mausoleum, nor was it the magical artifacts lost by the predecessors, nor was it the roasted chicken, roasted lamb, silver, and books that he had thrown into the lake during his battle with Nank's two maids. Of course, it was the heavenly tome monoliths. No, Chen Chongqing froze and thought of a possibility. He suddenly realized that the most precious object in the Garden of Zhou was not the heavenly tome monoliths. At least to him, if Lady Chu Jian could not leave the Garden of Zhou, then was she still in the Garden of Zhou? If the Garden of Zhou had not been destroyed, did that not mean that she might still be alive? Was she in there right now? He knew that the possibility was extremely small, but since he thought of this possibility, he did not hesitate at all. His spiritual sense directly charged towards the image of the black monolith. A huge boom resounded in his sea of consciousness. His strand of spiritual sense suddenly turned into countless strands of green smoke and disappeared without a trace. He woke up in the library of the Orthodox Academy. His sea of consciousness was shaken, and he was in incomparable pain. He was so vexed that he wanted to vomit. Only after a very long time did the painful feeling gradually subside. Without hesitation, Chen Chongqing once again sent a strand of his spiritual sense into the sheath, requesting for the 10,000 swords to open a path. In an instant, he once again arrived at the other end of the ocean of sword intent. Yet there was nothing there. The 10,000 swords obeyed and opened a path. The sword intent had vanished, so there was naturally no ocean of sword intent. Without an ocean, how could there be another shore? Without a shore, there would naturally not be a black monolith on the shore waiting for his arrival. Chen Chongqing thought about it and gave up his control over the swords. As a result, the extremely sharp sword intent once again filled the space, and the ocean reappeared. His spiritual awareness once again passed through the ocean of sword wills with great difficulty. He arrived at the opposite shore, saw the black stone tablet, and then descended. As expected, his wisp of soul consciousness was destroyed, and he woke up again. Qin Changsheng was silent for a long time. Then he stood up and walked out of the library. Tonight, he had consumed too much of his divine sense and could not support another attempt. To suppress the urge to rediscover the Garden of Zhou, to find those heavenly tome monoliths, and the intense impulse that she brought was an extremely difficult task. Even if he was the most resistant to temptation and the most rational youth in the world, it was still very difficult for him to endure. There were some things that Chan Changsheng could no longer endure. It was that he had not bathed in many days, from the time he entered the Garden of Zhou to the 10,000-li journey south. There had been no time for him to wash. Thus, after returning to the Orthodox Academy today, he did not do anything else. He first used 3 large buckets of hot water and an hour to carefully wash himself from head to toe, from inside to outside. But even so, he still felt that he had not washed himself clean. Returning to the house, he washed himself 2 more times. After confirming that there was not a speck of dirt, he gripped the dragoncry sword and began to cut his hair, shave his beard, trim his fingernails until they were slightly round, trim his toenails until they were square, and then change into clean clothes. Only then did he feel somewhat more comfortable. Walking to the window, he once more glanced at Zhou Prison and the Mausoleum of Books. After saying a few words of greeting to Zhixiu and Tang 36, he went to bed and began to sleep. By now, it was already late at night. At 5 in the morning, he promptly woke up. There was a faint smell in the room. It was not the smell of cosmetics, nor was it the fragrance of flowers, but it smelled very comfortable. A strand of black hair rested on the side of his pillow. Presumably, MOU had come. Chen Changsheng was somewhat perplexed. Did I actually sleep so soundly last night? Or was it that MOU was even stronger than people imagined? It must be known that he was already a cultivator at the peak of ethereal opening. Even if MOU was at the star condensation realm, there was no reason for her to silently lie by his side for an entire night without him noticing. Of course, his current mood was still mostly because he was not used to it and felt that it was rather absurd. MOU was the most famous beauty of the great Zhou dynasty. She was the woman with the second highest status in the great Zhou dynasty. Moreover, they were enemies. He had just returned to the capital, but she did not even give him a single night of time. She wanted to stealthily come over and sleep. What was she doing? Outside the window, rain suddenly began to fall. It did not carry much of a chill, but the early summer had instantly returned to spring. Chan Changsheng gazed out the window and suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the direction of the academy's gate. Everything was somewhat familiar, just like that rainy morning when Tian Haixingxue had led the cavalry of the great Zhou Northern Army and directly smashed apart the gate of the Orthodox Academy. In the rain this morning, who was it that had come? It was still someone from the Tian Hai family. It was not Tian Haixingxue, but it was someone that Chan Changsheng and Xian Yuanpa knew. Xian Yuanpa looked at the youngster sitting on the wheelchair. His emotions were somewhat complicated. Previously, his right arm was destroyed by this youngster. Logically speaking, he should have hated this youngster. But later on, this youngster was crippled by Princess Luo Luo and was even more heavily injured than him. His right arm's injury had basically been healed by Chen Changsheng's treatment. The simple and honest youngster of the bear tribe couldn't really feel much hatred. Instead, he felt some sympathy. The one sitting in the wheelchair was Tian Haya Air, the young elite that once had a terrifying reputation in the capital. Of course, that was already in the past. Currently, Tian Haya Air's face was pale, his cheeks were slightly swollen, and the muscles on both of his legs were obviously atrophied. He had already become a cripple. Anyone who looked at this youngster, if they did not know the evil deeds he had done, would probably be like Xian Yuanpa and feel sympathy for him. But Tian Haya Air was a person that didn't need sympathy. He had never sympathized with others, and he didn't need sympathy from others. No matter to others or to himself, he was very cruel. Even if he was crippled, he wouldn't be willing to swallow his anger. Chen Changsheng, F***ck your ancestors. When Chen Changsheng arrived at the gate of the Tradition Academy, the first sentence he heard was related to himself. Although until today he didn't even know who his parents were, nor did he know where his ancestry was. But when he heard Tianhai Er's shrill voice, he couldn't help but feel angry. The gate of the Tradition Academy was pushed open. In the morning rain, Chen Changsheng walked into the 100 Blossom Street and began to face his enemies, just like last year. The stage play of Choosing Heaven will be performed from the 1st to the 9th of May in Shanghai's Yihai Theater. Tickets are currently on sale. Those who are interested can search for tickets on Baidu and purchase tickets on GualaLifeNet.com or Shanghai Cultural Information Net. You can also follow the Weibo of Choosing Heaven's stage play and see the latest information on the sale of tickets. Just like everyone else, I'm not very familiar with stage plays, but I still have a good hope that our story can be adapted into various forms of art. I hope everything goes well. Sincerely. Chapter 433. It had already been a year. There were no other new students in the Tradition Academy, but there were already new students. It was no longer the graveyard scene from before. The courtyard was still cold and cheerless, but the outside of the courtyard was heavily guarded. The priests of the Li Palace guarded the 100 Blossom Street. Even in the middle of the night, they did not leave. The common people could not even get close. However, when the priests looked at the youngster in the wheelchair, their eyes were filled with vigilance and loathing, but they could not do anything. This was because the position of the Tianhai family in the Zhou dynasty was too special, and also because Tianhai was now a cripple. Using the words of the divine empress, the people of the orthodoxy should act mysteriously. In the eyes of the people of the orthodoxy themselves, they should be reasonable and honorable. It was very difficult for them to take the initiative to attack a crippled youth. Besides this, there was another reason, and that was that there was a person standing next to Tianhai. That person was about 30 years old. He was tall and thin, and his face was gloomy and cold. The aura he exuded was very powerful. In the drizzle, Tianhai's sharp and venomous curses never stopped. That person always remained silent, not saying a word. He only quietly looked at the closed courtyard door, not knowing what he was thinking. The new gate of the Tradition Academy was pushed open from the inside. Chen Changsheng walked out and stood on the stone stairs. He looked at Tianhai, who was in the rain. He noticed at first glance that Tianhai didn't have an umbrella. The person standing beside the wheelchair also didn't have an umbrella for him. He looked at that person, guessing that this person shouldn't be Tianhai's bodyguard, but he didn't know where he came from. Chen Changsheng looked at Tianhai in the wheelchair again and said, "You should know why the elders in your family wanted you to come to the Tradition Academy and curse." Tianhai's face was soaked by the rain and appeared even paler, but his expression was still fierce and arrogant, and he became excited because of Chen Changsheng's appearance. "Of course I know." The youth's voice became sharper and sharper, and even seemed a little mournful, as if he was crying and laughing at the same time. "I'm already a piece of trash, so of course I have to make good use of trash to seek sympathy. Moreover, the matter between us is just a matter between children. It's nonsense. Does your holiness have the nerve to say that my Tianhai clan is suppressing the principle of the Orthodox Academy?" Chen Changsheng was silent for a while, then said, "But I don't understand. What's the point of making a fuss like this? I can ignore you." Today was different from the past. At the gate of the Orthodox Academy, a bishop was leading several dozen priests and guards of the Li Palace, keeping the two people from the Tianhai clan at bay. Let alone the wheelchair-bound Tianhai, even if Tianhaisheng Shui brought his cavalry back from Yangshui Pass, he still wouldn't be able to charge straight to the gate of the Orthodox Academy like last year. Tianhai laughed, revealing a mouth full of fine white teeth, looking like a wounded cub, and said with a sharp voice, "Did you not hear me cursing your family's 18 generations of ancestors?" Chen Changsheng was silent for a while and said, "And then?" "I have to curse 18 generations of your ancestors." Tianin. Tian, family, family, and he, family, academy, Chong school, and they world, our academy, long, you, academy, Chun Tian, and he, academy, Tian he, Chun Chin long and sect, day, world, then continued to curse. After saying this, Chen Chongqing turned around and walked towards the Tradition Academy. Before he pushed open the courtyard door, he heard Tian Haier insult his parents and ancestors. He was really very angry and was prepared to teach the Tian Hai clan a lesson, no matter what tricks they had up their sleeves, no matter what conspiracy they had. But when he really walked out of the courtyard door and saw the crippled youth on the wheelchair, he suddenly changed his mind. Tian Haier was cruel and cold-blooded. He used to be a scary person. Now he was crippled, but he was still scary. Scary because he had no shame, no respect, no pursuit, and now he didn't even have ambition. Right now he was just a pile of mud. If Chen Chongsheng and the Tradition Academy didn't want to be stuck in the mud and be slowed down, they could only ignore him, or they could fill the mud with sand and stones. Since they couldn't kill Tian Haier, they didn't need to do anything else. Why should they listen to this? Looking at Chun Chongsheng's back, Tian Haier was stunned. He became even angrier. He kept cursing with his sharp voice. All kinds of dirty words came out. Chun Chongsheng didn't seem to hear anything. His footsteps didn't speed up or slow down. He walked steadily into the academy. Seeing the scene, the priests were both shocked and impressed. They thought to themselves, no wonder he is the Pope's most valued junior. No wonder he is the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy. The man standing next to the wheelchair looked at Chun Chongsheng's back. He raised his eyebrows. He seemed surprised, but then his surprise turned into disdain. Compared to his peers, Chun Chongsheng was more mature, or maybe he was more quiet and calm. He didn't look like a 16-year-old youngster. Xian Yuanpa looked older, but in reality he was only a 14-year-old bear youngster. He didn't understand why Chun Chongsheng could endure it. He asked angrily, "That's it?" Chun Chongsheng looked at him and said, "What else can I do? Kill him?" Xian Yuanpa thought about it and said, "It's not impossible." Chun Chongsheng said, "He's a member of the Tian Hai clan. Unless the Li Palace personally issues an edict, no one can do anything. Besides, there's always someone following him. Didn't you see?" Xian Yuanpa asked, "Is that person strong?" Chun Chongsheng said, "Star condensation stage." Xian Yuanpa took a deep breath. That tall and thin man didn't look more than 30 years old. He was actually a star condensation cultivator. But we can't just let Tian Haier curse outside, right? I have more important things to do. Yes, Chun Chongsheng had more important things to do. Compared to that matter, the disgusting methods of the Tian Hai clan and the evil intentions hidden behind the scenes weren't important. In the past, to him, the most important thing was obviously cultivation. But now, apart from cultivation, there was another thing. That was, in the process of sharpening his sword heart, he needed to reach the other shore of the ocean of sword intent. He needed to find that black monolith and confirm whether or not it was the path to the Garden of Zhou. If it was, he wanted to enter the Garden of Zhou again and take a look. His divine sense fell upon the shadow of the black monolith. In an instant, the terrifying energy contained within the monolith, an energy that didn't belong to this world, was shattered into thousands of tiny strands and turned into nothingness. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the library. Qi sprayed out from his body, lifting up his clothes and also stirring up a small amount of dust on the bookshelf. He made 3 consecutive attempts, all of which ended in failure. His face was as pale as the sheet of paper on Xiao Zhang's face. He could no longer endure the shock to his sea of consciousness and the backlash from that vigorous energy. He pushed open the door to the library and ran straight to the green grass by the lakeside. He clutched his chest and began to vomit, looking very wretched. Xian Yuanpa was smashing the tree when he saw this scene and was very shocked. He walked forward to support him and looked at the water stains on the grass and said worriedly, "Fortunately, we haven't eaten breakfast yet. Otherwise, it would be too disgusting." Chen Sheng paid a lot of attention to the 3 meals a day. This morning, due to his impatience, he didn't eat breakfast. He still had to eat lunch and dinner, but he couldn't quite stomach it. His chest and abdomen were filled with disgust and discomfort. Whatever he ate was tasteless. This plate of boiled cauliflower. Did you forget to add salt? Xian Yuan felt wronged, thinking that in the entire Tradition Academy, I'm the only one who cooks, and yet you're still being so picky to the point of being unreasonable. He angrily yelled, "You're the one who said to use less oil and salt when cooking." Chen Sheng held the bowl of rice and said weakly, "Tonight, make some dishes with flavor." Xian Yuan looked at him and thought that he was probably really sick. Otherwise, how could he hear such words coming out of this guy's mouth? He asked, "Do you want Her Highness to come over and take a look?" Chen Sheng shook his head. After all, Luo was a demi-human princess, her status far too sensitive. He did not wish for her to participate in the confrontation between the imperial court and the orthodoxy. The next morning there was no rain, so the late spring turned back to early summer. The weather in the capital during May and June was always so unpredictable and hard to define. Tian Haiya was also a person that was hard to define. He was once cold-blooded, bloodthirsty and cruel. Relying on the power of the family of Tian Hai and his own talent in Xiaoxing, he committed all sorts of crimes. Later on, after he was beaten into a cripple by Luo, he disappeared for half a year. When he once again appeared in the eyes of the people of the capital, he showed a rare patience and perseverance, although what he did seemed to have nothing to do with these 2 words. The wheelchair rolled over the stone and arrived at the entrance of the Tradition Academy. The crippled youngster drank a mouthful of tea to moisten his throat. Under the strange gaze of the priests, he continued to curse. Yesterday, he had already cursed for a whole day. It seemed that today the Tradition Academy would still be shrouded in those filthy words. But different from yesterday, today, a lot of people of the capital came to watch. The people could not walk into the depths of the 100 Blossom Street. They were blocked outside by the priests and the soldiers of the royal guards who came to maintain the order. But they could hear Tian Haiya's curses clearly. Tian Haiya's curses were actually nothing new. They were just cursing Chen Sheng's elders, especially his female family members. Chen Sheng, F***ck your mother. Chen Sheng, I'm going to kill your daughter. Hearing these filthy words, the people outside of the street were discussing. They all shook their heads and didn't say anything. Although they were unhappy, no one dared to say anything. That skinny and tall man was still standing beside the wheelchair. He looked at the tightly shut gate of the Tradition Academy. No one knew what he was thinking. His lips still had that faint mocking smile. It seemed like he was laughing at Chen Sheng's cowardice, but it also seemed like he had some other meaning. You really don't care? Even if you don't tell Her Highness, you should at least ask the central administration to deal with it. Xian Yuan heard Tian Haiya's curses coming from outside of the school. His face turned red. He looked at Chen Sheng and said, Chen Sheng said, when the gate of the Tradition Academy was smashed by the people sent by Tian Haixing, who repaired it in the end. Xian Yuan thought he understood what he meant and asked, "Then what should we do next?" "Wait for a few more days." Chen Sheng paused and said, "Wait for 3 more days." After saying that, he looked at the dim sky outside of the school. It was cloudy today. Once ignored, the days would go on as usual. The flow of time wouldn't change like the planes of the unsetting sun. A day passed very normally. Tian Haiya blocked the gate of the Tradition Academy and cursed for 2 whole days. The Li Palace and the Education Board both kept silent. No news came out, but news came from the Mausoleum of Books. In 3 more days, a certain person would come out. Today I only have 1 chapter. Tonight I will accompany my wife to watch 7. Tomorrow there will be 2 chapters. I love you not for 2 or 3 days. I really like this song. When I was writing the chapter title, I kept humming it. 2 days later, little Tang will come out. Actually, I don't know how to write about him. I just think he's very interesting. I like this kind of person, even though I can't do it. Chapter 434. On the morning of the 3rd day, Tianhaya and the tall and thin man punctually arrived at the gate of the Tradition Academy. Quite a few citizens of the capital had already arrived. 2 days ago, Chen Changsheng had used up a lot of his spiritual sense, but he still couldn't open the black monolith on the other side of the ocean of sword intent. Today, he decided to stop for a day. He sat in the library and began to read and study. Suddenly, a gust of wind arose, and then it rained. The sound of wind and rain, the sound of reading, and the sound of cursing outside the wall all rose and fell without disturbing each other. Chen Changsheng could achieve the state where nothing could disturb his mind, but other people couldn't. The citizens of the capital already had an extremely bad impression of the Tianhai family, and they didn't have any good impression of the infamous Tianhai. When it was noon, the citizens who were drenched in the rain realized that Tianhai's cursing was nothing new and returned to the beginning. Finally, they let out their first boos, followed by mocking laughter. Tianhai sat in the wheelchair. His face became paler and his eyes more violent. He raised his right hand. Thus, the crowd clashed with the Tianhai family's entourage. The Li Palace clergy and the Imperial Guard arrived a little late. 2 commoners were injured, and one of the Tianhai family's entourage was beaten by the crowd until he was covered in blood. The Li Palace clergy was very angry. They demanded the Imperial Guard to immediately clean up 100 Flower Street. At the same time, they didn't wait for the result of the discussion and wanted to ask Tianhai and that person to leave. At this moment, Tianhai slapped his injured leg and mournfully yelled, "Murder!" The Li Palace is powerful. They want to force people to death. They forced Liang Xiaoxiao to death. Forced Zhuang Huanyu to death. Now they want to force me to death. Come you. I want to see, after you force me to death, how will you explain to my aunt? The Li Palace clergy were very angry, but they couldn't do anything to him. Ever since the Divine Empress took the place of the previous emperor to review memorials and manage the court, in the past 200 years, the Tianhai family had already replaced the Chen royal family and became the #1 family of the continent. Now, the Zhou court was filled with the descendants of the Tianhai family. The most important thing was, all the juniors of the Tianhai family had the same aunt, the Divine Empress. Looking at the bright and dazzling plum blossoms in the room, and then at the tired bishop, Priest Exan's mood was somewhat complicated. He said, "If this goes on, it will be too embarrassing." Mei slowly opened his eyes, looking at a certain place outside the window. In any case, the Tianhai clan has already lost face for so many years, they don't care. Priest Exan said, "How should we deal with it? If it really doesn't work, I'll bring people to drive Tianhai away." Mei expressionlessly said, "Could it be that you still don't understand that this is a smokescreen? Illusion." Priest Exan suddenly recalled the news that had come from the Li Palace. Slightly surprised, he asked, "Are you talking about the matter that the 2 archbishops brought up a few days ago?" Within the orthodoxy, there were the so-called 6 prefects. Whether it was in terms of seniority or status, Mei was undoubtedly the head of the 6 prefects. However, the other 5 were also rather frightening figures. Mao Chuyu was no longer the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He took over as Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, becoming one of the orthodoxy's 6 prefects. The 2 archbishops that Priest Exan spoke of were respectively in charge of the Hall of Subjugation and the Hall of Shadow Steps. Several years ago, these 2 archbishops used the reason that the demons were flourishing and that the orthodoxy needed to increase the combatability of human cultivators as a reason. They proposed a proposal in the 6 Ivies, with the exception of Star Caesar Academy, teachers and students of the other academies could challenge each other as long as they were of the same level. If there was no sufficient reason or special permission from the Lee Palace, the challenged party could not refuse. Of course, there were also many rules and restrictions. No matter how one looked at it, this proposal was reasonable and necessary. As a result, when it was proposed, it received the support of all the halls and academies. The imperial court also praised it, and Star Caesar Academy even requested to participate in this plan. The problem was that when these two archbishops proposed this proposal, they were the Pope's most loyal assistants, and now the entire continent knew that they firmly stood on the side of the divine empress. Yes, these two archbishops were precisely the two archbishops that Melecia had spoken of a few days ago as turning the corner. When the eyes of the entire capital, especially the attention of the priests of the Lee Palace, were attracted by this farce in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, these two archbishops, once again, pushed for this matter. Just what did they want? Priest Exaen suddenly understood and couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. He said, "His Holiness the Pope will not agree." The problem is there a reason to not agree? Melecia's voice was somewhat tired. The Orthodox Academy currently only has Qin Changsheng and Shen Yuanpa. Even if Tang Tang comes out of the mausoleum of books, there are still too few people. According to the proposal's rules, it's too disadvantageous for the Orthodox Academy. 2 years ago, when this proposal was made, there wasn't a single person in the Orthodox Academy, so you can't accuse them of intentionally targeting the Orthodox Academy. Melecia finally said, "Right now, the Orthodox Academy only has 3.5 students. That is also the Orthodox Academy's own problem." At night, Priest Exaen went to the Orthodox Academy and explained the situation to Qin Changsheng. That person is called Zhou Ziheng. He comes from the Temple Seminary and is a priest of the Hall of Subjugation. He has the status of a teacher of the Temple Seminary, and he's also a guest official of the Tianhai clan, crossing the wilderness without a person on a boat. Zhou, the meticulous Zhou. What's hum? It's that hum. Chen Changsheng thought of the tall and thin man by the wheelchair, thought of the faint mocking expression on his face, and thought to himself, he truly is a very arrogant person. Zhou Ziheng has 3 identities. No matter which one, it will give him sufficient reason to act. If you act against Tianhai or Priest Exaen sincerely said, "Since you've already endured for 3 days, there's no harm in enduring for a few more days. If the proposal from the Hall of Subjugation really does pass, then we'll see how to deal with it." Because Zhou Ziheng is a priest of the Hall of Subjugation, it is inconvenient for the Lee Palace priests guarding the Orthodox Academy to do anything to him. Qin Changsheng fell silent for a while, then raised his head and seriously asked, "Then if that proposal really does pass and Zhou Ziheng challenges me, the Lee Palace will not do anything?" Priest Exaen replied, "Yes." Qin Changsheng said, "But he's at the star condensation realm, 1 level higher than me. According to the rules, I can refuse." Priest Exaen looked into his eyes and said, "He's challenging the Orthodox Academy, and you're the principal. Perhaps there's someone else in the Orthodox Academy that can accept it?" Chen Changsheng looked at him and said, "The position of principal was given to me by His Holiness and the bishops. The Orthodox Academy has no other students. You know the reason best." Priest Exaen was somewhat embarrassed and said, "In short, just endure for a few more days. His Holiness naturally won't let you suffer a loss." Qin Changsheng said nothing more. After escorting him out of the Orthodox Academy, he entered the library and continued to absorb starlight for purification, continued to cultivate his sword style, and continued to decipher the secret of the black monolith. The night passed without a word, and morning came once more. Tianhai and that expert from the Hall of Subjugation, called Zhou Ziheng, also came together. Today there was still a light breeze, a drizzle, and also obscenities and insults. Qin Changsheng could endure. In the end, those obscenities were not food that was heavy in oil and salt. nor was it a bed covered in dust. There was nothing that he could not endure. Yet, in the evening, a rather bad piece of news came from the Lee Palace. The proposal of the two archbishops had finally passed. Whether he could endure or not was no longer important. A letter of challenge was delivered into the Orthodox Academy, signed by Zhou Ziheng. Seeing that signature, Chen Changsheng fell silent for a while. Then he continued to absorb starlight for purification and continued to observe the black monolith. Now he could already clearly see the lines on the black monolith, confirming that it was the heavenly tome monolith that Wang Jitze had left in the Lingyan pavilion. Moreover, he could already clearly sense that on the other end of the black monolith was the qi of the Garden of Zhou. Compared to the heavenly tome monolith and the Garden of Zhou, the methods of the Tianhai clan and certain people within the orthodoxy were really nothing. It was just that when his spiritual sense arduously crossed that ocean of sword intent, he seemed to always be able to see a small boat floating in that vast ocean. That small boat incessantly swayed with the waves, as if it could be destroyed at any moment, yet it never did. It was rather vexing to see. He had originally believed that Tianhai who was endlessly cursing outside the academy gate, was the same as that broken academy gate last year, a disgrace to the Tianhai clan. But now he realized that although he still believed that his view was correct, who wouldn't be angry when faced with this sort of situation? On the morning of the second day, Priest Xian once again delivered two pieces of bad news. Zhou Tong refused to release Zhishio, and Zhishio was still imprisoned in that gloomy prison. It was unknown when he would be released. The entire continent knew that Zhou Tong was the divine empress' most loyal and most terrifying dog. Compared to him, Su Shiji was nothing. The unyielding attitude that Zhou Tong had displayed in this matter made many people feel that it was an extremely bad omen. A storm was coming, and the city was about to be destroyed. Could it be that the imperial court really wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality with the orthodoxy? Qin Changsheng asked. This is His Holiness's will. His Eminence has personally come to visit, yet Zhou Tong is still not willing to release him. Just what does he want to do? At this moment, Priest Xian delivered the second piece of bad news. His Eminence's health is somewhat poor. It might be 2 days before he can go see Zhou Tong. At last, there was some good news. Zhishio could not come out, but a certain person was finally coming out. At 5 in, Chen Changsheng woke up on time and walked out of the gate of the Tradition Academy with Xian Yuan Pa. At this time, Tianhai and Zhou Ziheng hadn't arrived yet. There was a very long distance between the Orthodox Academy and the Mausoleum of Books in the south of the city. When they crossed the small river and arrived at the front gate of the Mausoleum of Books, the morning light was already very bright. As he gazed at the verdant and lush green tomb in front of him, Qin Changsheng very naturally thought of the scene when he viewed the monoliths and comprehended the Tao. Then, for some reason, he thought of the mausoleum in the plains of the unsetting sun. Then he thought of that night several months ago. Wang Pa and Mao Qiu were standing where he was standing right now, while he, Gohanchi, and the others were holding the dying Sun Mei. Mao Qiu was no longer the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy. After taking over as the Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, his authority was even greater, but he was much quieter. There had been no news of him in the capital for a long time. Thinking of Zhuang Huanyu's death and the recent silence of the Heavenly Tao Academy, he vaguely understood the reason behind it, and his heart couldn't help but feel somewhat heavy. A rumbling sound roused him from his stupor, accompanied by the slight tremors of the ground. The heavy stone gate in front of the Mausoleum of Books slowly opened. Try to finish the next chapter before 8:30. Chapter 435. Gradually, people walked out of the Mausoleum of Books. Most of them were the top 3 students who participated in the spring imperial examination. Those people obviously knew Qin Changsheng. They were surprised when they saw him, and then they all bowed to him. That night, under the starlight, countless people broke through to the next level, and the Mausoleum of Books bloomed with fireworks. No matter how they felt about Qin Changsheng, they all had to thank him. Qin Changsheng bowed back and then looked at the mausoleum of books again. After a long time, Tang 36 finally came out. His hair was disheveled and his body stank. His expensive clothes were full of stains, and he was carrying a quilt and a fur coat whose original color could no longer be seen on his shoulders. He didn't look like the elegant young master who was doted on by thousands of girls. He looked like a beggar who had just stolen some useless belongings from a dilapidated mansion. But the biggest change was not these but his eyes. His eyes were very bright. Before, his eyes were also very bright, but it was a clear brightness. Now his eyes were bright. In addition to being clear, there was also a sharpness to them. Even his dirty hair couldn't hide it. "I almost didn't recognize you." Qin Changsheng looked at him and said, "More handsome." Tang 36's eyebrows raised slightly. He was indescribably frivolous. Qin Changsheng thought, "You are easier to recognize like this." He shook his head and said, "Dirty." As he said this, he very naturally and imperceptibly took a step back and stood further away from Tang 36. Tang 36 threw the quilt and fur coat on his shoulder to Xian Yuanpa and hugged him with a big smile. Xian Yuanpa looked at the stinky quilt and fur coat in his hand helplessly. There was no helplessness on Qin Changsheng's face because he used his hand to cover his face to avoid smelling or touching anything dirty. Tang 36 let go of him and asked proudly, "What changes do you see in me?" Qin Changsheng seriously looked at him from head to toe and asked, "The Wenshui family cut off your money. Now you want to learn to be independent?" Tang 36 said, "What are you talking about?" Qin Changsheng pointed at the quilt in Xian Yuanpo's arms and said, "If it was the old Tang Tang, why would he take out the quilt that Mr. Sun used for decades? What do you know? This is a souvenir." Qin Changsheng thought to himself, "What is this commemoration for?" "To commemorate the time we spent viewing the monoliths and comprehending the Tao in the mausoleum of books." Tang 36 turned around to look at the green mausoleum and said ruefully, "How can people like you, who covet the treasures of the Garden of Zhou, who have not completed the time you spent viewing the monoliths, be worthy of saying such words?" Qin Changsheng did not know how to respond, so he said, "It seems like your days in the mausoleum of books were pretty good." Tang 36 said, "Not bad. A few days ago, I barely managed to enter the upper level of ethereal opening." When he said the words upper level of ethereal opening, his expression was deliberately calm and his tone did not fluctuate. But both Qin Changsheng and Xian Yuanpa could hear his pride and arrogance. Qin Changsheng remembered that when he left the mausoleum of books, Tang 36 had just entered ethereal opening. Now, in just a few months, he had broken through 2 thresholds and reached the upper level of ethereal opening. He indeed had the right to be proud, but he thought that, according to this guy's personality, he would definitely not play it down to the end. As expected, in the next moment, Tang 36 broke through. He turned around and looked at Qin Changsheng excitedly and said, "F***CK, you don't even know that right now. I can teach Guan Fei by how to behave." Breaking through in cultivation was an extremely difficult matter. To be able to break through 3 levels in such a short amount of time was even more unimaginable. Tang 36's excitement was understandable, but Qin Changsheng found it hard to be excited. Looking at Qin Changsheng's calm face, Tang 36 finally remembered that the reason why he and himself had such good fortune in the mausoleum of books could not be separated from the starlight that Qin Changsheng attracted that night. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and said, "Of course, I have to thank you for this matter, but in the end, it's still because my talent is high enough." Qin Changsheng gave a relatively objective conclusion. "It's mainly because, after you entered the Tradition Academy, you didn't slack off anymore." This was also what the wise elder from the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance had said in the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Tang 36 had nothing to say, so he could only say, "Are you not going to congratulate me?" "Congratulations," Qin Changsheng said without any sincerity. He then looked towards the mausoleum of books and asked in confusion, Where are Go Han-shi and the others? Why haven't they come out yet? Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian left the mausoleum of books ahead of time and entered the garden of Zhou. Among the Mountain Li disciples, Go Han-shi, Liang Banhu, and Guan Fei were the same as Tang 36. They stayed in the mausoleum of books to continue viewing the monoliths. Although the orthodoxy did not require the monolith viewers to leave the mausoleum of books, Qin Changsheng thought that since so many people had finished viewing the monoliths, they should also come out. But after looking for a long time, he did not see the figures of those 3 people. Tang 36 said, "Originally, we agreed to leave the mausoleum of books together, but I don't know what urgent matter happened in Mountainly, so they left last night ahead of time." Qin Changsheng thought to himself, so it was like this. Seeing his expression, Tang 36 asked in surprise, "You know what happened in Mountainly?" Qin Changsheng grunted. Of course he knew that something big happened in Mountainly. If it wasn't something really big, no one would disturb the monolith viewers in the mausoleum of books. Tang 36 was a little surprised and asked, "What happened?" Qin Changsheng signaled Xian Yuan to throw the stinky bedding and fur on the carriage and said to Tang 36, "Let's go back and talk." Tang 36 suddenly remembered something. He put his hand into the bedding and took out a letter and a notebook. He gave it to Qin Changsheng and said, "Go Han-shi told me to give this to you." Qin Changsheng recognized that it was the notebook left behind by Sun Mei. It helped him avoid many detours in the process of viewing the monoliths and also helped the youths who lived under the same roof. The letter was left behind by Go Han-shi. The content was very normal. It said that he left the capital early and could not meet again. He used the pen to greet him. The future was long, and they would definitely meet again. Tang 36 looked at the letter and said mockingly, "It seems that the friends of Mountain Li are still not convinced." Qin Changsheng said, "Why can't you think of people in a positive light? Go Han-shi did not mean what you said." Tang 36 suddenly said, "I heard you are now the principal of the Tradition Academy." Qin Changsheng hesitated for a while and said, "It seems yes." The rumor was confirmed. Tang 36 was silent for a while. Then he looked at Qin Changsheng and said sincerely, "Your status is already different. You can't be as naive and childish as before." As he spoke, he reached out and patted Qin Changsheng's shoulder. Qin Changsheng looked at the dirty hand on his shoulder. His lips couldn't help but twitch, but he did not argue with him. It was said that in the vast ocean and the mountains of sorcery, a grain of rice and a pearl. Su Li had lost to him on this matter, so winning against this fellow was nothing to boast about. Returning to 100 Flowers Lane, the carriage stopped. Tang 36 looked at the Li Palace clergyman who bowed to Qin Changsheng and felt a little uncomfortable. He jumped off the carriage and entered the small store at the entrance of the lane. Xian Yuan sat in the carriage and brought his ragged belongings back to the Tradition Academy. Qin Changsheng followed Tang 36 and saw him buy 2 fried dough sticks and a bowl of soy milk. He ate them all the way to the lane. It was clearly the simplest and most common food, but Tang 36 ate it happily. He shook his head and was very happy. Is it really that good? Qin Changsheng was truly very curious. Tang 36 said, "You don't know, in the mausoleum of books, other things are fine, but the food is too terrible, especially after you and Qi Jian left, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Does that idiot Guan Fei know how to cook? I'm actually beginning to miss the food Xian Yuan made. I even feel that the food in the Tradition Academy is even better than the banquet in Clear Lake Restaurant. How miserable do you think it is?" Qin Changsheng thought it truly was miserable, and then he thought of the cold and ruthless Guan Fei by cutting bacon and stir-frying green peppers in that small courtyard. He couldn't help but shake his head, finding it hard to imagine. Tang 36 pressed half of the dough stick in his hand into the slightly yellow soy milk and asked, "Do you want a bite?" Qin Changsheng looked at his finger that had stuck into the soy milk and thought of the dirt he had seen under his fingernails. He hurriedly waved his hand and said no. Tang 36 was very disdainful. Asterisk, 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 do you understand life? Chun Chang Sheng helplessly said, although I know you've been stifled for a few years playing the role of a noble young master, and now you're showing your true temperament, but can't you use less profanity? It's rather grating on the ears. Tang 36 readily accepted the advice. He raised the bowl of soy milk as a sacrifice to the heavens and said to the sun that was gradually being covered by the clouds, Sun, as they joked and cursed, the two entered 100 Flowers Lane. They saw Zhou Ziheng standing there, holding a paper umbrella. Suddenly, the sun in the sky was completely obscured by the dark clouds. Rain began to drift down, falling on that paper umbrella that seemed like it could not withstand the wind. This scene was very wonderful, and there was a vague mystery that was difficult to describe with words. Zhou Ziheng seemed to have anticipated the descent of the rain. This represented some sort of realm, indicating that he had already begun to peer into the Tao of the heavens and earth. But seeing this scene, Qin Chang Sheng first thought, why didn't you hold an umbrella when it was raining 2 days ago? Then he remembered the letter of challenge. This person represented the temple seminary to challenge the Tradition Academy. Tang 36 was even more unfazed by this scene. He didn't know who this thin and tall man was. He was a little angry because the sun suddenly disappeared, but he thought of Chen Changsheng's words, so he didn't say anything. He only said, please make way. After saying this, he walked forward. Zhou Ziheng didn't make way. He didn't even look at him. In his eyes, there was no stinky, ragged young man. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said, have you thought about it? Qin Changsheng said, I've thought about it. I'll give you a reply. Zhou Ziheng smiled and said, are you going to keep thinking about it? This smile was very hateful, with a hint of sarcasm and mockery. Tang 36 was stunned. He couldn't imagine that in the current Zhou dynasty, there was still someone who dared to speak to him and Chen Changsheng with this kind of attitude in front of the Tradition Academy. Who is this person? He asked Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng replied, Zhou Ziheng. Tang 36 had never heard of this name before. He asked, Zhou Ziheng, who is that? Zhou Ziheng was slightly angered. He felt that Chen Changsheng and this beggar-like fellow were intentionally using this conversation to humiliate him. Tang 36 turned around and asked Zhou Ziheng, I say, just who are you? Zhou Ziheng expressionlessly replied, Zhou Ziheng of the Hall of Subjugation. Tang 36 looked at him and asked, you're very famous? Zhou Ziheng didn't know how to answer this question. Inexplicable. Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at an idiot, then turned around and said to Qin Changsheng, you have to understand your current identity and status. There's no need to pay attention to a person you've never even heard of. Can he even reach? Saying this, he carried the soy milk and youtiao and walked past Zhou Ziheng, walking into the alley. Zhou Ziheng lowered his head and took a deep breath. Tang 36 stopped. The rain suddenly became disorderly and then began to fall back down like willow leaves. Zhou Ziheng appeared in front of Tang 36, blocking his path. All was quiet in 100 Flowers Lane. Tang 36 looked at him and very calmly said 4 words. Idiot, get out of the way. At this moment, Tang 36 was covered in filth, reeking, and his clothes were in tatters. He really did look like a beggar, but his aura was that of a prince, because he had never been a beggar, but the richest prince in the world. He was richer than the princess of Ping, Luoluo, and Nank, these true princesses added together. So when he said these 4 words, his arrogance had reached an unimaginable level. Was it unimaginable to be so domineering? Yes, because this was not arrogance but confidence. Without 1,000 years of accumulation, it was impossible to nurture such confidence. Zhou Ziheng squinted at Tang 36, his killing intent rising. Yet in the end he did not attack, because Chen Changsheng was looking at him. Many of the Li Palace priests were also looking at him. What made him most wary and puzzled was that the imperial guard that should have stood on his side had suddenly given rise to an undisguised and berserk killing intent. He was very clear that if he really attacked, then in the next moment, that killing intent would tear him into pieces. He didn't understand why, and his hands began to tremble. Tang 36 walked past him again, with a bowl of soy milk in his left hand and a fried dough stick in his right hand. He still didn't look at him. The curtain of rain slowly fell and fell on the paper umbrella silently. From the depth of 100 Flowers Lane came Tian Hai Yair's cursing. Listening to those filthy words, Tang 36's face became a bit ugly. Walking to the gate of the Tradition Academy, he saw Tian Hai Yair sitting on the wheelchair and cursing at the gate. Chun Chong Shang, if you can, then come and hit me. Tang 36 walked behind Tian Hai Yair and didn't stop him. He listened carefully. Many priests, imperial guard, and citizens of the capital who heard the news all saw this scene. The rain was like smoke in the 100 Flowers Lane. Chun Changsheng asked, "What are you doing?" Tang 36 said, recalling my life. Tian Hai Yair heard the sound, turned around, and his expression changed slightly. Chun Changsheng didn't understand. What life? I'm seriously recalling my life. Tang 36 sighed. Mother ***, I've never heard such a cheap request. I said I like him. He is my good friend. Chapter 436. Although Tang 36's body was evil and his clothes were ragged, which was very different from how he was rumored to be, his sarcastic words and the nonchalance in his eyes still made Tian Hai Yair recognize his identity very quickly. Tian Hai Yair's face instantly became very ugly. The reason why he went to Heavenly Academy to attend the Ivy Festival was because Tang 36 once said to the entire capital that he would disable him. The final result of this incident was that because of the restriction of the teachers of the Heavenly Academy, Tang 36 couldn't participate in the Ivy Festival. Tian Hai Yair used an excuse to get mad and destroyed one of Xian Yuan Po's arms. Then he was beaten into a cripple by Luo Luo. The two never met each other officially until today, but this didn't stop Tian Hai Yair from blaming Tang 36 for his disability. He stared at Tang 36. His face was pale and his eyes were full of hatred. He wanted to eat Tang 36, but he didn't do anything. Instead, after hearing Tang 36's last sentence, he thought of Tang 36's personality in the legends. He had a bad feeling in his heart and said with a sharp voice, I said it to Chun Changsheng. It has nothing to do with you. If you dare, then come and hit me. Tian Hai Yair was shameless and vicious. He dared to say this to everyone, including Chun Changsheng, but he didn't dare to say it to Tang 36, because he knew that Tang 36 could really put down his pride and attack him. Tang 36 was a little surprised. He didn't expect this guy to react so fast. He couldn't think of any good solution, so he said unreasonably, I don't care. I want to fight with you. After saying this, he said to Chun Changsheng, help me roll up my sleeves. His left hand was holding a bowl of soy milk, and his right hand was holding a half-fried dough stick. He indeed couldn't roll up his sleeves by himself. Rolling up sleeves was a symbolic action that everyone understood. It was a signal of departure. Tian Hai Yair's face was a little pale. I won't fight with you. I am disabled anyway. If you don't care about losing face, you can do it yourself. Chun Changsheng was thinking whether he should really roll up Tang 36 sleeves or not. Suddenly he heard the words, don't care about losing face, and thought that this was great. He didn't need to think anymore. As expected, when Tang 36 heard that he wasn't afraid of losing face, he didn't hesitate at all. His eyes lit up and he said, what is face? Tian Hai Yair looked at him and said uneasily, what do you want to do? Do you really want to bully a disabled person like me in front of so many people? The misty rain enveloped 100 Flowers Lane. The rain was not heavy, and it was even gradually lessening. The Li Palace priests and the imperial guard responsible for maintaining order were already surrounded by many citizens of the capital. Tian Haiyer's reputation in the capital was extremely bad, but he was still a youth not even 14 years old, and he had already been disabled for almost a year. His legs were as thin as hemp sticks, and he looked very pitiful. If someone made a move on him while he was in the wheelchair, it would probably attract a lot of criticism. But Tang 36 was not afraid of any censure or criticism. He looked at Tian Haier, smiled, and said, "Do you know that there was one thing I liked to do the most when I was young?" Tian Haier stared into his eyes, his voice trembling. "What is it?" Tang 36 said, "I like to use a stick to chase after a dog that has fallen into the river and beat it nonstop." Tian Haier understood what he meant, shivered, and shouted with a trembling voice, "Someone come quickly! The only grandson of the Wen, Shui, Tang family is hitting someone. He wants to hit a disabled person like me." Tang 36 was not in a hurry and let him shout. When Tian Haiyer's voice finally stopped, he said to the crowd outside the lane, "Everyone see clearly I didn't do anything." He really didn't hit Tian Haier. He didn't even touch Tian Haiyer's clothes. As he spoke, he purposely raised the soy milk and youtiao in his hands, indicating to the crowd that even if he wanted to hit someone, he couldn't do it. Then his expression suddenly became cold, and one foot fiercely kicked Tian Haiyer's abdomen. A muffled sound. Tian Haier, together with his wheelchair, was kicked into the rain on the ground, and his head was bleeding. Tang 36's kick was too hard. The disabled youth curled up like a shrimp. His face was extremely pale, and he was in so much pain that he couldn't even speak. In front of the gate of the Orthodox Academy, outside 100 Flowers Lane, there was a deathly stillness. No one could speak. No one could have imagined that one moment he was still smiling, raising the soy milk and youtiao, and in the next moment he really would hit the disabled youth in the wheelchair. The guards of the Tian Hai clan and Zhou Ziheng didn't expect this, so they had no time to stop him. A gust of wind howled, and the guards of the Tian Hai clan rushed to the scene, protecting Tian Hai. The paper umbrella in Zhou Ziheng's hand had been thrown away long ago, and his right hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword. With a face full of anger, he stared at Tang 36, as if he would attack in the next moment. Tang 36 still didn't pay any attention to this star condensation expert. Looking at the crowd around him, he raised the soy milk and youtiao in his hands a little higher and said, "Everyone see clearly I really didn't attack, and I definitely didn't attack. I kicked. It really was like this. He didn't hit Tian Haier with a dirty hand. He hit him with a dirty foot." Zhou Ziheng roared, and the edge of his sword came out of its sheath. The sword intent suddenly rose, echoing in front of the Orthodox Academy. The target of this powerful sword intent was naturally Tang 36. In the mausoleum of books, viewing the monoliths, comprehending the Tao, and diligently cultivating, Tang 36's cultivation had advanced extremely quickly. At such an age, he had inconceivably cultivated to the upper level of ethereal opening, but he was no match for a star condensation expert. However, he still didn't even glance at Zhou Ziheng, continuing to walk towards the gate of the Orthodox Academy. Upon walking into 100 Flowers Lane and seeing Zhou Ziheng for the first time, he knew that this person very much wanted to be seen by the world, so from start to finish he did not look. This was naturally a humiliation. Zhou Ziheng was a priest of the Hall of Subjugation, a guest official of the Tian Hai clan, and a teacher of the temple seminary. No matter which identity it was, he was bound to have the right to be arrogant. How could an arrogant person endure this sort of humiliation? So even though he already knew Tang 36's identity, he still wanted to attack. The sword was not able to attack. Only the concentrated sound of bowstrings being drawn could be heard. Several dozen imperial guards arranged themselves behind Tang 36, the divine crossbows in their hands raised horizontally. The sharp and rippling chi of the crossbow bolts was terrifying. A deputy general stood in the back, his face covered in frost, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. He stared into Zhou Ziheng's eyes, his warning extremely clear. As long as he moved, he would die. Tang 36 and Qin Changsheng entered the Tradition Academy. The gate of the academy closed with a bang. It was like the crisp sound of a slap to the face. Tian Haiya was supported by his guards and attendants, his face pale and in unbearable pain. Zhou Ziheng stood in the drizzle, his face pale. He looked at the deputy general and coldly said, "I want to know, does Divine General Xue know of this matter?" Everyone knew that the imperial guard responsible for the safety of the entire capital was under the command of the continent's second-ranked Divine General, Xue Xingchuan, and Divine General Xue had always been loyal to the Divine Empress. Today, the attitude the Imperial Guard had displayed in front of the Orthodox Academy was clearly hostile to the Tianhai clan. The Deputy General looked at Zhou Ziheng as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "My grandfather's family only has one son. If I don't stop you, do you want your entire family to be killed?" After saying this, he waved his hand to signal his subordinates to disperse. Then he walked to the inn opposite the Orthodox Academy and continued to drink tea and stare blankly. In the Orthodox Academy, Xian Yuanpe and Chen Changxing very enthusiastically carried Tang 36 into the library. "Your enthusiasm makes me feel very uncomfortable." Tang 36 looked at the expression on their faces and felt a little strange. Qin Changxing looked at him with a face full of relief. Xian Yuanpe also looked like he was relieved from a heavy burden. "You don't know, these days that little crippled monster has been cursing outside the gate every day. We really can't hold it anymore, so we were hoping for you to come back." Qin Changxing looked at him and said gratefully, "Just as expected, as soon as you came back, you settled all these things. Otherwise, we really don't know what to do." Tang 36 was a little proud, but also a little angry. He said, "You let people block the gate and curse? Good for nothing." Qin Changxing was a little embarrassed and said, "I really don't have the experience to deal with these things." Xian Yuanpe said on the side, "Tianhai Heir is cursing us because he's crippled. He doesn't even care about his face. What can we do? Do we really have to beat him up?" Tang 36 thought to himself, didn't he just kick him once, and it was very enjoyable? Why can't he? Chen Changxing said helplessly, "That guy is like a pile of shit right now. No matter how we deal with him, we can't avoid dirtying our hands. So we have to wait for you to come back." Tang 36 said, "Why do we have to wait for me to come back?" Chen Changxing turned around and looked at the scenery outside the window. Xian Yuanpe was more honest and said, "You have more experience in this area. Plus, we all know that you are even more shameless than him." Tang 36 heard this and was a little surprised. Then he became angry. "What do you mean? You two better explain to me. What do you mean? Is it that in your eyes I am also a pile of shit?" Xian Yuanpe was speechless for a moment. He didn't know how to explain. He wanted to say a few words, but he realized that he didn't know what to say. Chen Changxing comforted him. "What we mean is that your ability to be annoying and not afraid of dirt is perfect for dealing with this kind of person." Tang 36 reconstructed this sentence in his heart and became even angrier. Isn't this just a stick to hold shit up? How is it better? Of course, they weren't really angry, they were just joking. Qin Changxing and Xian Yuanpe were indeed waiting for Tang 36 to come back. Because they were both not good at talking, they were also not good at thinking and planning. Luo obviously had this ability, but her identity was too sensitive. Therefore, if they wanted to solve the Tradition Academy's current problems, they could only rely on Tang 36. In fact, not many people noticed that many of the Tradition Academy's previous problems were solved by Tang 36. After hearing Chen Changxing talk about the new rules of the tradition, Tang 36 thought for a while and then put the youtiao in his hand into the soybean milk and said, "Drown them." Qin Changxing and Xian Yuanpe didn't understand. What did drowning mean? The next chapter will be at night. Chapter 437. Don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. Tang 36 didn't explain too much to them and said directly, "If I can't take care of this, then my name isn't Tang 36. This sentence was said with great confidence, but Chen Chongsheng and Xian Yuan were more concerned about the other three problems. First, there was a lot of rainwater in this bowl of soybean milk. How diluted was it? Second, the youtiao was held in his hand for so long. How dirty was it? Third, it was common for Tang 36 to change his name. Why did this promise sound a bit unreliable? His name wasn't Tang 36. His name was Tang Tang. Now that he entered the upper stage of ethereal opening, he had to leave the proclamation of azure clouds and enter the proclamation of golden distinction. But he didn't know what his rank would be. It couldn't be that he was still, coincidentally, ranked 36. Last time when the proclamation of azure clouds changed, he used the excuse that his rank wasn't good to change his name. So he couldn't use the same excuse this time. Xian Yuan felt that Tang 36's words were too insincere, so he shook his head and walked out. Chen Chongsheng wanted to ask for clarification, but then he thought that he really didn't understand these things, so why bother himself? He asked, "What name do you think you'll change this time?" "I think I'll at least enter the top 30. That's the proclamation of golden distinction, not the proclamation of azure clouds." "So what?" "I am at the upper stage of ethereal opening. As long as I'm not lazy, I can catch up to you in minutes." Tang 36 said proudly. There was a lot of dust on his face, but it could still be seen that his skin was whiter and he was much thinner. It was obvious that his cultivation in the mausoleum of books was very difficult. To be able to enter the proclamation of golden distinction at this age and have the confidence to enter the top 30, this was extremely rare in the past. He indeed had the right to be proud. Chen Chongsheng was truly happy for him and said, "Keep working hard." Tang 36 didn't feel good after hearing this and said, "You really think of yourself as the principal." Chen Chongsheng laughed and was about to apologize, but Tang 36 suddenly sighed. "What's wrong? When I think about how you and Su Yurong ran so fast in front of me, and how I can only shock my relatives in Wenchuan with my amazing achievement, it's really boring." After saying this, Tang 36 stood up and looked around the library. He suddenly asked, "It's fine if Princess Luo Luo didn't come to greet me, but where is Zhexiu?" In his heart, the wolf youth Zhexiu was a high-quality student that he had bought for the Orthodox Academy with a large sum of money. Now that the Orthodox Academy was facing a problem that needed his help, he couldn't let him leave. Chen Chongsheng said, "There's something I haven't told you yet." Tang 36 turned to him and asked, "What is it?" Chen Chongsheng replied, "Zhexiu is currently in Zhou prison." From the moment Chen Chongsheng and Zhexiu left the mausoleum of books and entered the garden of Zhou until today, this story seemed rather long, but it did not take too long to finish. Even the youtiao in the soybean milk had not soaked. So many things have happened. Tang 36 said, "Let's not worry about other things first, but Zhexiu, we spent money on him, so we must get him out as soon as possible." The Orthodox Academy had spent money on Zhexiu, so he was a person of the Orthodox Academy. He was a person of the Orthodox Academy, so the Orthodox Academy had to protect him. This was a very simple principle. Moreover, Zhou prison was an extremely frightening place. Spending one more day in there was like spending 1 year in the abyss of hell. Chen Chongsheng was also very worried about Zhexiu, but the Orthodoxy and the imperial court were in a standoff, and there was also a problem within the Li Palace. Bishop Mei Lish's health was not good, so he didn't know what to do. From a certain perspective, Zhou Tong is like that Tianhaier that all of you can't do anything about, but he's countless times more frightening and powerful than Tianhaier. In order to achieve his goals, he can do even the most savage and disgusting of things. Everyone knows that he's the divine empress's mad dog. Whoever the empress wants him to bite, he'll bite. Against such a person, all schemes are useless. But why does he have to bite onto the Orthodox Academy? Because His Holiness, the Pope, has already expressed that the throne of the great Zhou should be returned to the imperial clan. But the Empress clearly doesn't think this way. Chen Chongsheng lowered his head and said, "In truth, I don't really understand what's so important about the throne." Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at a monster and said, "That's the throne of the great Zhou. That's supreme authority. That's a temptation that no one can resist." Qin Changsheng raised his head and looked at him. "But I really don't feel that there's anything good about this. I just feel that spending time and energy on these things is really very unreasonable." Tang 36 looked into his eyes. They were so clear and clean, without the slightest falsehood. He couldn't help but be slightly moved. "You really think this way?" "Yes," Chen Chongsheng replied. "Chen Chongsheng, you really are a monster, and a true monster, not a freak like Tian Haier." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "You can't understand us people, and I also find it very difficult to understand you, why you really don't care about these things." Chen Changxing thought it over, then said, "Maybe it's because I've seen something even more important." "Such as?" "Life and death. Outside of life and death, everything else was other people's business. Life and death were also important. There were no great things in life, only life and death. These were all words from the ancient records." Chen Changsheng was well versed in the Taoist canon and remembered many things, but he didn't need them. He only needed to remember the two words, life and death. For ordinary people, life and death were after their 100 years. For cultivators, life and death were after their 100 years. For Chen Changsheng, life and death were always in front of him, in a single thought, so he could never forget it. Before life and death, how could he still be interested in those appendages of life? At least, before he solved his own problem, he wouldn't be too interested. Tang 36 didn't know Chen Changsheng's problem, but after hearing the two words life and death, for some reason, he suddenly felt that the rain outside the window brought a chill that didn't belong to summer. Chen Changsheng then thought of other things. He thought of the sick bishop, the internal conflicts of the orthodoxy, and the words that Suli once said to him. He said, "Is this world really so unbearable?" Tang 36 said, "At least it's not as clean as we hope. No one can understand why you can become the principal of the Orthodox Academy." Even though he had rendered great service for the orthodoxy and the great Zhou in the Mausoleum of Books and the Garden of Zhou, with Qin Changxing's age of 16, there was no reason for him to become the principal of the Orthodox Academy. In the view of Tang 36 and many people who didn't know the inside story, there was definitely something fishy about this matter. There were many transactions or inside stories that couldn't see the light of day. Qin Changxing didn't believe that those things couldn't see the light of day. At the very least, he could tell Tang 36, "My teacher is His Holiness's senior brother." His gaze passed through the window and fell upon the verdant campus of the Orthodox Academy. He said, he was the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 was very shocked, even more shocked than when he had heard Chen Changxing talk about Suli and that part in Xunyang City. The bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy 10-some years ago had directly or indirectly changed the entire human world. Even the distant longevity sect and Mount Li in the south had been greatly affected. The previous principal of the Orthodox Academy was an important figure that no one could forget, even though his name had long since been struck off from the records of the Orthodoxy and was strictly forbidden to mention in the capital. No wonder you're just a young Taoist from the countryside, but you can read the Taoist canon. No wonder His Holiness made you the principal of the Orthodox Academy and raised you to be his successor. No wonder Zhou Tong would plot against the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 looked at him and murmured, "So you're actually that important figure's only successor?" Qin Changxing said, "No, I still have a senior." When he left Xining village, his teacher had told him a few things, so he rarely mentioned his senior in the capital. Up until now, he had only admitted it in front of Su Yurong and Tang 36. Tang 36 asked, "You still have a senior? What kind of person is he?" Qin Changxing thought about it and realized that Senior Yurin was really hard to describe with words. Perhaps it was because Senior never spoke? Senior is a very extraordinary person. How extraordinary? Could he be even more extraordinary than me? Senior is 10,000 times more extraordinary than you were in the past. Now that you've started to work hard, Senior will also be 100 times more extraordinary than you. Chun Chongqing looked at him and said. He didn't intentionally mock or look down on him, but rather came to a conclusion after serious consideration. Tang 36 was silent for a very long time, then said, It seems that he really is an extraordinary person. Chun Chongqing said, Yes, he's my idol. Tang 36 suddenly asked, What does your teacher want to do? Chun Chongqing was silent for a while, then said, I don't understand what you mean. Tang 36 stared into his eyes and said, You should understand very well what I mean. Since Taoist Ji was not only Taoist Ji, but also the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy and the leader of the opposition against the Tianhai Divine Empress, then everything he did was worthy of careful consideration. He should have been well aware that Chun Chongqing's background could not possibly remain a secret. Through the attitudes of Mei Li Sha and the Pope, it could even be confirmed that before Chun Chongqing arrived in the capital, he had already contacted the Li Palace. Then he should have been even more aware that sooner or later, the Tianhai Divine Empress would eventually learn of Chun Chongqing's background. This also meant that Chun Chongqing's situation would become extremely difficult, perhaps even incomparably dangerous. Yet, he still insisted that Chun Chongqing enter the capital to take the imperial examination and did not give any explanation. Why? Was it because of that engagement with Su Yurong? This was a very important question. It was just that Chun Chongqing had never thought about it, or perhaps he had intentionally not allowed himself to think about this question, until Tang 36 pierced through this window paper. Reporting to Your Excellency, the latest news has come from Han County. A doctor, Taoist Ji, truly did come, but by the time the mounted scouts arrived, that person had already disappeared. Not even the Empress was able to kill a person like Principal Shang. So how could people like us possibly find him? Zhou Tong sat behind his desk, examining the 10-odd records of the case that had been delivered last night from the front courtyard, not even raising his head. The subordinate stood in front of the desk and whispered, According to what was said in Xining village, we have verified that that traitor Shang truly does have another disciple. Zhou Tong's finger paused in the middle of flipping through the pages. Then he raised his head. My state after returning home really is much better. Chapter 438. Zhou Tong put down the file and turned to his subordinate. Is it confirmed? The subordinate took out a portrait from his bosom and said, It's absolutely true. Zhou Tong did not take it. He only glanced at it, saying nothing. The subordinate continued, According to the records in the file, in the year that Chun Chongqing came to the capital, he never mentioned this person. Zhou Tong gazed at the light outside the window in silence for a very long time. Suddenly he said, Tell me, is Crown Prince Zhaoming dead, or was he secretly taken away by those fellows of the imperial clan with evil intentions? The subordinate didn't know how to answer and was very nervous. In a slightly hoarse voice, he asked, Sir's meaning is? Zhou Tong shook his head. I don't mean anything. I just subconsciously thought of this matter. The subordinate did not dare to respond. There are some matters that can't be investigated clearly for now, but there's no need to care about them. Zhou Tong drew back his gaze from the window and said, Why was Liang Xiaoxiao willing to make a deal with a devil like Black Robe, willing to commit suicide just to deal with Su Li and his daughter? Because he wanted revenge. Why did Su Li go to the longevity sect and kill so many people, and then run to Xuanyang City to start a massacre, thereby greatly damaging the Liang clan's strength? Because the Southerners wanted to take advantage of the great Zhou's internal strife to invade the north and capture his wife to threaten him, making him go crazy. Why is the great Zhou in internal strife? Because of that bloody incident in the Orthodox Academy. It's said that all things have a source. In the end, everything is the problem of the great Zhou's imperial throne. As long as we can clearly understand this point, Our direction will not be wrong." The subordinate said. In 5 days, Prince Chenlu went to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education 3 times. Don't forget, although the Empress has no sons of her own, Empress Yen still had many sons and grandsons. Even if the Empress really did abdicate in the future and return the imperial throne to the Chan imperial clan, Prince Chenlu is so young. Just what chance does he have? It's only natural for him to be anxious. My lord's meaning is that Prince Chenlu wants to fight for the orthodoxy's support. Archbishop Mei Lisha is about to return to the Sea of Stars. If he doesn't show his face at this time and fight for the favor of the priests of the Li Palace, how can he live in the capital until now, and even live better and better? Although you don't care about the throne, everyone else cares about it except for you. That's why I believe that in the end, or in other words, the root of all problems is the throne. Dean Shang's thoughts will ultimately fall on that throne. After hearing Tang 36 words, before Qin Chang Sheng started thinking, the first thing he noticed was the title. Who is Principal Shang? Your teacher, Shang Xingzhou. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time. This was the first time he had heard this name, and he had lived with the owner of this name for 15 years. In this recent period of time, he originally had many opportunities to learn this name, but he did not ask whether it was Bishop Mei Lisha or the Pope because he did not want to know this name. He did not want to face some problems that he did not want to face because of this name. At the same time, he also did not want others to know that he did not know this name, because this made him somewhat sad. Tang 36 vaguely guessed his current mood. He didn't know why he disliked his teacher and asked, "Have you ever thought about why he took you as his disciple?" Chun Changsheng was a bit confused and asked, "Master picked me up by the stream. What other reason could there be?" Tang 36 stared into his eyes and said, "Your surname is Qin." And Qin Changsheng still did not understand. Tang 36 said, "Have you never thought that you might be from the imperial family?" Chun Changsheng was startled and shook his head. "No, I floated down from the mountain stream inside the cloud grave. My birth parents might be the descendants of the sinners." Tang 36 said mockingly, "How old were you back then?" "You don't know shit." Chun Changsheng said, "This is what Senior said. Senior has never lied to others, and he definitely would not lie to me." He said this sentence with certainty. There was no hesitation in his clean eyes. Tang 36 still wanted to say something, but looking into his eyes, he couldn't bear it and changed the topic. "How do you plan to go next?" From Xining to the capital. Chen Changsheng originally thought that his path was very clear. It was to find the secret to defy the heavens and change his fate, and thus escape from the shadow of death. But now he suddenly realized that before this, he already had to face many forks in the road. "I don't know. You need someone to help you. Who can help me?" "Me." "Okay, then you help me." It was a very simple conversation, but it was very warm and trusting, because they were both youngsters. They were either calm and mature or arrogant and frivolous, but they were both youngsters. Youths were sometimes so hot-blooded and naive that it was annoying. However, compared to those elders who had been through hardships for a long time, their lives were much simpler, and their interactions with each other were much simpler. Tang 36 said, "No problem. First, let's understand the cause of this incident." Chun Changsheng shook his head and said, "Help me do something first." Tang 36 didn't think and said without hesitation, "Say it." "What is it?" Chun Changsheng said to him, "Can you go take a shower and brush your teeth first?" What was the saying again? I haven't even brushed my teeth yet. Anyways, Tang 36 was annoyed and kicked out of the library by Chen Changsheng. He used 2 big buckets of hot water and washed himself from head to toe. After making sure that there was no dirt from the mausoleum of books, he changed into a clean set of clothes and took the steamed bun that Xian Yuan had just made and went to the lake. Chun Changsheng placed Mr. Sun Mei's notes on the bookshelf and registered them. Then he went to wash Mr. Sun Mei's bedding and Tang 36's fur. It took him an hour to wash them clean. Then he hung them under the great banyan tree. They looked like two swings. The rain in the morning had already stopped. The sunlight of early summer shone on the surface of the lake, but it didn't evaporate too much water. It didn't feel stuffy. Tea on high, yet airs cursing could no longer be heard. The Tradition Academy was quiet and beautiful. Standing by the lake and looking at the scenery on the other side, Tang 36 said, "My grandpa said that the Pope is a good person, so you don't have to worry too much." As he spoke, he was very focused on tearing the steamed bun in his hands into pieces. The Pope was Chen Chongsheng's martial uncle. Logically speaking, he should have been very happy to accept the statement. But from following Su Li to the south in the snowy plains of the Demon Realm, he had seen too many assassinations and plots. It was very difficult for him to convince himself that the Pope was really a good person. Zhu Luo and Guan Xinca should have been invited by the Pope. Chun Chongsheng looked at the blue sky and white clouds reflected in the lake. He wanted to touch the unreal sky of the green leaf world and shook his head. How could a good person become the Pope? This view of the world seems mature, but it's actually very vulgar. Tang 36 threw the pieces of the steamed bun into the lake and said, "His Holiness the Pope has never been famed for his wisdom. He was able to become the leader of the Orthodoxy because he truly had a very close relationship with the Divine Empress. Of course, the most important reason is still because his venerable self-strength is truly unfathomable. Even your teacher, Principal Shang, ultimately lost to him." Chun Chongsheng said, "But he wanted to kill Su Li. We've circled back again." Tang 36 looked at him and jeered. "I'll say something you don't like to hear, but Su Li has killed so many people in his life, and countless people want him dead. Could it be that those people are all bad people? In reality, in their eyes, it was you who protected Su Li all the way to the south that was the truly bad person." Chun Chongsheng thought to himself, could it really be like this? We still have to first understand why Principal Shang sent you to the capital. Tang 36 said, "You must know that my grandfather once said that in this world, there are only 4.5 people that he truly fears. Your teacher is one of them." Chun Chongsheng was very curious. "Who are the others?" Tang 36 replied, "The Empress, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, and Black Robe." Chun Chongsheng counted the most powerful figures of the continent and asked in confusion, "Then what about the Demon Lord?" Tang 36 replied, "The Demon Lord isn't a person." "That half, who is it?" "Black Robe. Since he's serving the demons, he naturally can't be considered a human." Chun Chongsheng caught the important point in these words and asked, "Does the Tang Old Master know of Black Robe's identity?" Tang 36 did not answer. Time gradually passed. The sun also gradually moved. The blue sky gradually turned red, the color of dusk filling the sky. In the sky behind the great banyan tree, one could already see that a smear of darkness was about to arrive. They stood on the shore of the lake, whispering about these matters that had no interest in them. Back then, in the Plum Garden Inn, Chun Chongsheng and Tang 36 had truly met for the first time. At that time, they had subconsciously wanted to appear more mature, wanted to imitate adults in exchanging pleasantries and socializing, but they had seemed so clumsy, childish, and adorable. Now that they had finally come into contact with these things, they suddenly realized that they did not want to be mature, because maturity often meant decay, meant complexity and exhaustion. Several dozen koi fish swished their tails in the lake. Because they had eaten their fill of steamed buns, they seemed rather weak. One of the fattest koi fish was actually slowly sinking into the mud at the bottom of the pond. The mood by the lake was rather heavy. The world has always been very large, and the hearts of people have always been very complex. When it's dark, it's better than the night. When it's boring, it's better than the Heavenly Tao Academy. Especially those old people who rule over this world. Their bodies exude an aura of dust. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "But those things are actually not important because we are not those kinds of people." Qin Changsheng looked at his reflection in the lake, looked at his own face, and felt somewhat uneasy. He said, "Have you ever thought that in the future we might become those kinds of people that we loathe the most right now?" Tang 36 sneered, "That's each person's problem. Could it be that if we become a pile of shit, we still have the face to blame the world?" He continued, "You have to understand the kind of people we want to become, the kind of people our world will become." Qin Changsheng felt that these two words were far too reasonable. Before leaving Xuanyang City, Su Li had said a few things to him. Only now did he finally understand. He raised his head to Tang 36 and said, "Thank you." Given Tang 36's personality, he should have very indifferently replied with, "There's no need to be polite," but for some reason he did not. A cool and refreshing night wind blew over, slicing the golden waves on the lake into countless fragments. It was like he had returned to Xuanyang City. On the long street amidst the torrential rain, there were cracks in space everywhere, and at the edges of these cracks was a dazzling light. A metal blade stood before the wind and rain, unshakable. "I want to become a person like Wang Pa," he said. "I want to live like him." There is a second chapter. The time for the update has not been set. Chapter 439. In this world, Chen Chongqing had previously only had one idol, his senior brother Yurin. Later on, after experiencing that storm in Xuanyang City, there was also Wang Pa. The golden light gently flickered on the surface of the lake. He looked at the koi in the water, especially the fat koi that was gradually sinking into the mud. He thought to himself, "I don't want to live like this. If I can pass this test of life and death and survive, then I want to live like Wang Pa." He really admired Wang Pa and even worshipped him a little. Wang Pa was ranked at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation and was publicly acknowledged as the strongest expert of the middle generation. There were many people who worshipped him, and worshipping him was very common. Logically speaking, after hearing Qin Changsheng's words, Tang 36 should feel that it was natural, but his expression proved that he didn't think so because he knew what kind of person Qin Changsheng was. Qin Changsheng said that he wanted to live like Wang Pa, not because he wanted to be as strong as Wang Pa like other worshippers, but in other aspects. Tang 36 didn't think that was good. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said, "Don't be Wang Pa." Qin Changsheng withdrew his gaze from the lake and looked at him in confusion. "Why?" Tang 36 explained, "Because becoming Wang Pa is too bitter and too difficult, and it's also very easy to become tragic and stirring. No matter how we live, it is better to stay away from the word tragic." Qin Changsheng said, "I don't really understand what you mean." Tang 36 suddenly asked, "Do you know why he is called Wang Pa of Tianliang?" Snow-treading Sun Mei, painted armor Shaozhang, immovable mountain Yangwang Sun, famous name Guan Bai, the top rankers of the Proclamation of Liberation all had their own names that spread throughout the continent. They all had their own reasons for doing so. Some of them had their own techniques. Some of them had their own idiosyncrasies. Qin Changsheng had always thought that the reason why Wang Po was called Wang Po of Tianliang was obviously because he was born in Tianliang County. Now that he heard Tang 36's words, he finally realized that there was another reason. Tang 36 said, "In the past, Tianliang County had 4 great families, Zhu, Liang, Chen, and Wang. Among them, the Liang family and the Chen family became the royal family and ruled the entire human world. The Zhu family, on the other hand, produced countless powerful warriors, such as the current drunk under the moon, Zhu Luo. The reason why the Wang family could stand side by side with the other 3 families was because the Wang family was very rich. Many years ago, they could even be compared to my family." Qin Changsheng asked, "Then how did the Wang family decline?" Tang 36 said, "The problem is that the Wang family always supported the Liang family, but in the end, Lady Chen replaced the Liang family and became the emperor." Qin Changsheng was silent for a while and said, "So simple." A family of 1,000 generations is like a 1,000-legged insect. Especially the Shang family, they have always been good at diversifying their investments. Naturally, they won't lose everything with one wrong bet. It's just that after the Chun clan's uprising, the Wang clan will naturally be affected, and most of the clan's assets will be used for military expenses. The Liang clan will drop quickly, and the Zhu clan will follow closely, so it will be much better for them. Tang 36 said, "In this process, the Zhu family did many things, so from then on, the Zhu family and the Wang family became enemies." Chen Chongqing recalled the battle in Xuanyang City and the Holy Maiden's words, and finally understood why the Holy Maiden had said that Zhu Luo had selfish motives. Since they were enemies of 1,000 years, Zhu Luo was naturally unwilling to see the Wang clan, which was already in dire straits, rise again because of Wang Po's sudden appearance. Just as I said before, the Wang clan and a few important figures of the imperial clan had always been on good terms, and Taizu still remembered their old friendship, so he did not let the Wang clan suffer too much. It's just that the Wang clan never imagined that this would be the cause of their ultimate destruction. What do you mean? When Emperor Taizu was preparing to sort out the Wang clan, Chen Xuanba came to the palace with his sword and acted as a guarantor for the Wang clan, and the crown prince married the Wang clan's daughter. Crown prince? I'm obviously talking about the real crown prince. Chen Chongqing thought of those bloody storms from several hundred years ago, thought of that cruel story in the 100 Herb Garden, and couldn't help but feel a slight chill. He thought to himself that the Wang clan supported the crown prince, so the Emperor Taizong, who succeeded the throne, naturally could not tolerate them. And then, you should also know what happened next. In the coup of the 100 Herb Garden, Emperor Taizong killed his older brother, and even earlier, Zhou Dufu killed his younger brother. The world was finally at peace. When he said the word peace, the corner of Tang 36's lips perked up, filled with indescribable ridicule. Chen Chongqing fell silent, then whispered, "You're saying—" Chen Xuanba's defeat in the Garden of Zhou and death was a scheme of Emperor Taizong? What else? Tang 36 looked at him and said, Emperor Taizong and Zhou Dufu were brothers with different surnames, and Chen Xuanba was his younger brother. Why did the two of them fight? Chen Chongqing said, "Everyone says that Chen Xuanba saw that the affairs of the country were settled, so he wanted to pursue the highest realm of martial arts. So he took the initiative to challenge Zhou Dufu." Tang 36 said, "At that time, the army of Tianliang County had just entered the capital, and the situation in the capital was chaotic. Even the Yao hunters knew what Emperor Taizu's sons wanted to do. The family affairs were not settled. So how could the affairs of the country be settled? Chen Xuanba was the strongest martial force in the Crown Prince's faction, and he actually left at that time? Do you think that the once peerless martial god, the strongest expert of the great Zhou imperial family in 1,000 years, was an idiot?" Chen Chongqing said, "Or he just didn't want to see his own flesh and blood fight, so he just left and did not see it?" Tang 36 sneered, but did not say anything. Chen Chongqing knew that his reason was not convincing at all. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed and also a little sad. He lowered his head and looked at the sword on his waist. He felt that the sword became hot. It wasn't burning, but his skin could feel the heat. Or in other words, it was like the feeling of his eyes becoming hot. It was a feeling of sadness. This sword had a sword spirit, the sword spirit of the Dragon Cry sword. The Dragon Cry sword was Chen Xuanba's sword. From a certain perspective, he and the former young martial god were connected through the sword. The so-called sadness came from this sword. What about the Wang family? He asked. Chen Xuanba died, Emperor Taizu abdicated, and after Emperor Taizong ascended to the throne. How did he deal with the Wang family? If the emperor wanted to take care of the disobedient officials, why would he need to deal with them? Tang 36's expression was a little indifferent. He said, "In the 3rd month after Emperor Taizong ascended to the throne, when the autumn wind blew, he looked at the scenery and casually said one sentence. What sentence? The weather is getting cold. Let the Wang family go bankrupt. The lakeside was quiet. The night was getting darker and a little cold. Qin Chongqing didn't say anything for a long time. So the name Wang Pa of Tianliang came from this. Emperor Taizong was a great ruler. Whether it was his methods or his abilities, he was an expert rarely seen in 1,000 generations. But he didn't need to use any methods. He only needed to casually say one sentence, and there would naturally be countless people who would use countless methods to accomplish this task. Qin Chongqing understood what Tang 36 had said before. Power really was the most terrifying thing in this world. When the autumn wind blew, Emperor Taizong said one sentence. When the autumn wind blew, the Wang family was ruined. Countless heads fell, countless manors and fields were seized, and countless servants lost their homes. The Wang family of Tianliang County welcomed the most terrifying period of time. They were miserable to the extreme, and then, as the years passed, they were gradually forgotten by the entire continent. It was also at this time that a youngster appeared in the Wang family. That youngster was called Wang Ping. His cultivation talent was extremely outstanding. He was even judged by Elder Tianji to be the most outstanding genius of the human world after Suli. Perhaps it was to commemorate, or perhaps it was just to remember. After that youngster obtained the proclamation of Azure Sky, he changed his name to Wang Pa. Wang Pu of Tianliang County. Wang Pu of Tianliang. From the day he changed his name, the entire continent knew what he wanted to do. Tang 36 continued he wanted to demand justice from the great Zhou imperial court. The night wind brushed against Qin Chongqing's face. He felt refreshed, but his face was slightly hot. For one person to demand justice from the entire world, how grand was that? Could it be the important figures of the capital didn't respond at all? At the time, Wang Pa had already displayed the potential to enter the divine domain. Because of the oath made by the saints, not even Zhu Luo could casually move against him. Most importantly, at the time, the divine empress was already in power. Those people in the imperial clan were suppressed to the point where they couldn't breathe, so they didn't have the time or energy to deal with him. Of course, Wang Pa also faced many dangers, so he went to Winshui. I heard Senior Suli mention this matter. He said that Wang Pa worked as an accountant for your clan for many years. I've never met Wang Pa, but I've heard many stories about him from Father and the others. Tang 36 continued. Wang Pa has never understood why. Despite the Wang clan's wealth, when faced with the calamity of its destruction, the Tang clan was able to survive all this time. Later on, when he worked as an accountant for many years, he finally understood that the reason the Tang clan was able to survive all this time was firstly because it did not take sides and did not enter the battlefield. Secondly, if one wanted to invest, the Tang clan was more willing to invest in those young people who did not stand out. Like Senior Suli? Qin Chongqing asked. Tang 36 glanced at him and said, And you, didn't you say that my grandfather gave that umbrella to you? Qin Chongqing replied, It was stolen by Senior Suli. Tang 36 hated that Qin Chongqing didn't want to fight and no longer spoke of this matter. He continued, After the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy, the power of the imperial clan was miserably suppressed by the divine empress and His Holiness the Pope. Zhu Luo also became incomparably obedient, so Wang Pa left our clan. Qin Chongqing said, I know that he went to the south. Tang 36 said correct. He only used 10 some years to buy half of Scholatry Manor. He's already an expert of a region. Qin Chongqing was quiet for a very long time. After hearing Wang Po's story, he finally understood that Tang 36 was right. To become a person like Wang Pa, to live like him, was truly very difficult. My grandfather said that Wang Pa lived too bitterly. Tang 36 looked at him and very seriously said, I don't want you to live as bitterly as he did in the future. Qin Chongqing asked, Then just how should we live? Tang 36 said, We're young, so we should live like young people. Just like me. After I entered the capital and found out about Tianhaya Er's evil deeds, I wanted to cripple him. This morning, at the gate of the courtyard, I saw his idiotic appearance sitting in his wheelchair and wanted to kick him over, so I gasped. So what if I'm hot-blooded? So what? If you don't like it, then fight. From the other side of the lake came the muffled sounds of crashing. The two looked over, only to see that in the gloomy darkness, Xian Yuan was constantly smashing trees. Tang 36 laughed and said, "Look, if you have energy, you have to use it. If you have strength, you have to use it. Young people should be frivolous. What's the point of thinking so much?" Chun Changxing also laughed. An important correction. In the previous chapter, I talked about the stick of the Tradition Academy. It should have been a shit stick, but I beat it into a shit stick. This is very important and must be corrected. Regarding the scene of Xian Yuan smashing trees, it came from my nephew, who lived with me when I was young. At the time, he was 17 and full of energy. In the Riverside Park, he smashed trees whenever he saw them. Of course, he didn't destroy the trees. After that, he also did a lot of stupid things, such as secretly driving a train and getting hit on the butt by an air gun in a fit of pique. At the time, I thought he was stupid, but now that I think about it, youth is really full of energy. Last October, when I went back to my hometown and met him, we were both middle-aged people. We talked for an entire night, and both of us missed each other. If we could start our lives over, we would probably still live like that. Chapter 440. Young people should be arrogant. I suddenly feel that you are somewhat similar to someone. Chun Changxing said. Tang 36 looked at him and asked curiously, "Who?" Chun Changxing replied, "Su Li." Tang 36 said excitedly, "Grandpa said that I really look like him when he was young." The two currently conversing did not know that outside Xuanyang City, the Holy Maiden of the South had once said similar words to Su Li. Su Li was very arrogant, and Tang 36 was also very arrogant, though there were some subtle differences. For instance, Tang 36's arrogance was clearly much fresher, as a young genius with an outstanding family background. When Tang 36 first came to the capital from Anshui, he attracted a lot of attention and became a student that the Heavenly Academy focused on. However, he joined the Tradition Academy that had been ruined for many years in the Ivy Festival. No one could have imagined that the Orthodox Academy would obtain a new student in such a short amount of time, shocking the entire capital. But in the eyes of the citizens of the capital, what really made the Tradition Academy regain its fame was Chun Changsheng, who was engaged to Su Yurong, and Princess Luo Luo, who had an extremely high status. No matter if it was the Ivy Festival or the Great Trial, they were extremely outstanding. Compared to them, Tang 36 was a bit average. However, just when many people thought that Tang 36 would gradually become silent in the Orthodox Academy and become a normal student, just when those young cultivators who had successfully broken into ethereal opening in the Mausoleum of Books entered the Garden of Zhou to train themselves, he suddenly exploded. In the Mausoleum of Books, he continued to view the monoliths and comprehend the Tao, giving up on his life of luxury. He no longer had the appearance of someone who loved ease and hated work. He ate the unpalatable salted fish and lettuce rice that Guan Feibai made, slept with his clothes on, and cultivated when he woke. In the span of a few months, he had broken through 2 levels. The current him was already at the upper level of ethereal opening. As far as the eye could see, in the several hundred years since Su Li had appeared, besides him Wang Pe and other experts whose names had already shaken the continent, who else could enter the upper level of ethereal opening at his age? If it wasn't for Qiu Shanjun, Su Yurong, and Chun Changsheng being too abnormal, what he did could really shock the entire continent. Just as the Tang old master had said, his only grandson truly was very similar to Su Li. Thus, when Tang 36, who was very similar to Su Li, saw Zhou Ziheng again on the morning of the next day outside the Orthodox Academy, it was naturally impossible for him to have a good expression. According to the Orthodoxy's rules regarding the all-school martial exhibition, the Orthodox Academy must confirm its reply by today at the latest. Zhou Ziheng looked at him and said, "We are all cultivators, and our future enemies are all demons. In the end, many problems still depend on the sword and the spear. Do you really think that by closing the gate of the Orthodox Academy, the wind and rain outside can't get in? There was no rain this morning. Tian Haya, who had been sitting in a wheelchair for the past few days, didn't appear. Maybe it was because he was kicked too hard by Tang 36 yesterday. Only Zhou Ziheng stood in front of the gate. As his name suggested, Zhou Ziheng had always been a very arrogant person. Because he was a star condensation expert, his talent in cultivation was extremely outstanding. He was an instructor of the temple seminary, a priest of the Hall of Subjugation, and more importantly, he was a guest official of the Tianhai clan. With these three identities, he couldn't find any reason not to be arrogant. Of course, he was keenly aware that by representing the temple seminary in challenging the Orthodox Academy, he truly had lost his status as an expert. It was clearly the strong bullying the weak and rather shameful, but it was precisely because of this that he appeared even more arrogant. It was as if only by completely trampling the Orthodox Academy beneath his feet could he not feel so guilty. Tang 36 glanced at this person and finally remembered who he was. Yesterday, Zhou Ziheng had blocked his path. He hadn't expected that today this person would once again block his path. Yesterday, he was returning to the Orthodox Academy. Today, he was going out of 100 Flowers Lane to buy soy milk and youtiao. He didn't like eating Xian Yuan Po's breakfast. No matter how good the porridge was, it was forbidden by Chun Changsheng to add sugar. There wasn't even a plate of pickled vegetables, so how could he eat it? He was already angry after waking up, and now he was blocked by someone when he wanted to eat breakfast to his liking. Tang 36 naturally wouldn't be courteous with him. "Idiot, get up!" Tang 36 said to him. It was the same 4 words yesterday, and it was the same today. Zhou Ziheng was very angry yesterday, and today he was even angrier. His right hand, once again, gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. Just like yesterday, a yawn resounded from the inn in the lane. The priests surrounded them, and the soldiers raised the divine crossbows in their hands. The entrance to the Orthodox Academy was a scene of chaos, but Tang 36, who had caused this chaos, didn't have any reaction. He directly walked out. To him, the soy milk and youtiao in that old store were far more important than this person called Zhou Ziheng. No academy can operate with its doors closed. Zhou Ziheng looked at his back and coldly said, "Even if Chun Changsheng and you have deep backgrounds, if you really want to drag this on, the only thing you can do is turn the Orthodox Academy into a joke in the capital." Tang 36 stopped and turned his head. "Just what do you want to say to me?" Zhou Ziheng's expression turned slightly cold. He thought back to what he had seen and heard last night and knew that this youth relied on his status as the only grandson of the Tang old master to act arrogantly and fearlessly. Now, seeing Zhou Ziheng's slightly raised brows, he could guess that this youth was about to shamelessly cause trouble again. "I have nothing to say to you." He expressionlessly looked at Tang 36 and said, "I want to talk to Chun Changsheng." "So you also know that Chun Changsheng is the principal of the Orthodox Academy." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "Then what is your identity and status? Is Principal Chun someone that a little fart, like you can see whenever you want?" Only now did Zhou Ziheng realize that those 3 identities that he was so proud of, even combined together, would not give him the right to request an audience with Chun Changsheng. On the contrary, just based on the fact that he had called Chun Changsheng by his name, the Orthodox Academy could request the Hall of Subjugation to punish him. Thinking of this, his expression became rather unsightly. At this moment, the gate to the Orthodox Academy was pushed open from the inside. Xian Yuan Po's loud and clear voice, akin to the striking of a bell, rang out. "It's just buying soybean milk and youtiao. Why did it take so long? Hurry up! Otherwise, if Chun Changsheng sees it, he'll scold us again." Tang 36 was rather annoyed and said, "I used my own money to buy it. It's none of his business." Xian Yuan Pa somewhat anxiously waved his hand and said, "The soybean milk doesn't matter. The important thing is the youtiao. Youtiao is delicious, but it's fried. It's not good for the body." Qin Chongxing had arrived faster than they had imagined. Walking out of the gate, he looked at Xian Yuan Pa and said, "Pull Tang Tang back. You go by something else." Tang 36 was furious at these words. "I want to eat youtiao." "Do you really think you're the principal, managing everything? Didn't you already eat it yesterday?" Qin Chongsheng prepared to continue persuading him, but suddenly saw Zhou Ziheng and subconsciously stopped. Zhou Ziheng looked at him and said, "My temple seminary," Qin Chongxing said. "I have time tomorrow. Temple seminary, please choose the location." The gate to the Orthodox Academy was deathly silent. Zhou Ziheng thought he had misheard and asked, "What did you say?" Qin Chongxing said, "On behalf of the Orthodox Academy, I accept your challenge." The crowd that had come to watch the spectacle for the past few days suddenly exploded. Over 10 people ran through the streets and alleys of the capital. It wouldn't be long before the entire capital knew about what had happened this morning. The Orthodox Academy had accepted the Temple Seminary's challenge. There's a gathering today, so this chapter will end here. Chapter 441. Zhou Ziheng stood in place and didn't know how to react. He originally thought that the Tradition Academy would be the same as the past few days and think of a way to delay and then think of a way to face his challenge. For example, the Tradition Academy might invite Princess Luo Luo to come out from Li Palace. In that case, he could only admit defeat or avoid the battle. But the Tian Hai family had already prepared for this. If the Tradition Academy really let Princess Luo Luo come out, the Tian Hai family would definitely use this opportunity to create a bigger storm. But he didn't think that Qin Chongsheng would actually agree. After a moment, he finally came back to his senses and looked at Qin Chongsheng with a serious expression and asked, "Who'll fight for the Tradition Academy?" Qin Chongsheng said me. When he said the word me, he didn't pause and obviously didn't think about it. It seemed very natural. Yes, he was the principal of the Tradition Academy. When the Tradition Academy was being challenged, he should obviously face it. Zhou Ziheng suddenly realized that compared to the Qin Chongsheng from 2 days ago, there was something different about him, but he didn't know what exactly was different. Very good. He looked at Qin Chongsheng and asked, "Since the time has been set, then any place is fine." Qin Chongxing said, "According to the rules of the 2 archbishops of the Holy Church, since the time was set by the Tradition Academy, the place should naturally be set by the Temple Seminary." Zhou Ziheng looked at the dense crowd outside the 100 Blossom Lane and said expressionlessly, "Since so many people have come, then we might as well set it here." Qin Chongxing nodded to show that he had no objections. Looking at the soy milk and youtiao that Tang 36 bought, he shook his head and said helplessly, "Is eating and drinking really that important?" Tang 36 said, "Eating and drinking is not life and death. It's higher than life and death." The gate of the Orthodox Academy closed once more, but it was completely different from the isolation of the last few days. Everyone knew that tomorrow, this tightly shut gate would open once more. The commotion of the crowd outside the 100 Blossom Lane continued, so the entire capital was also in an uproar. The Temple Seminary challenged the Tradition Academy. This would be the first battle of the all-school martial exhibition. It had nothing to do with the profound meaning of the tradition's new rule for humanity to fight against the demon race. People knew very well that this meant that the Tian Hai family and the new faction of the tradition had finally begun to make their voice heard to the Li Palace. It didn't take long for this news to spread throughout the entire capital. Very quickly, many workers arrived with all kinds of construction materials. Not long after, a simple pergola began to take shape. Following that, dozens of carriages arrived outside 100 Flowers Lane. Many people alighted from the carriages. There were painters, storytellers, merchants, and guest experts from the 4 great workshops. Yes, these people who had reacted faster than the Jingdo government all came from Jingdo's famous 4 workshops. The four great workshops did all kinds of business: restaurants, brothels, food, luxury goods, fabrics. However, the most profitable business was always the gambling house. Every year, the grand examination was often the time when the four great markets made the most money. How could they miss out on such a naturally perfect betting event as the all-school martial exhibition? In reality, many people suspected that the reason the Lee Palace was able to ignore the objections of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education and pass the proposal of the two Sacred Hall archbishops in such a short amount of time was highly likely because the owners behind the scenes of the four great markets had secretly pushed for it. Of course, the area outside 100 Flowers Lane became incomparably lively. But the people of the four great markets did not dare disturb the peace and quiet of the Orthodox Academy. Businessmen were businessmen. What happened next was somewhat unexpected. A steward of the Heavenly Fragrance Market actually disregarded the vigilant gazes of the Lee Palace priests and the Imperial Guard and leisurely walked to the gate of the Orthodox Academy. Seeing this scene, the crowd was very puzzled. They thought to themselves, just what does this steward want to do? It must be known that the Heavenly Fragrance Market was the weakest of the four great markets and had always been ranked at the bottom. In this year's grand examination, dark horses repeatedly appeared. In the end, Chun Chong Sheng inconceivably obtained first upon the first banner, causing the Heavenly Fragrance Market to suffer even more grievous losses. There was even a rumor that the Heavenly Fragrance Market was highly likely to change hands. Where did this steward get his confidence from? Something even more unexpected happened. The gate of the Orthodox Academy actually opened and the steward just walked in. You're saying the Heavenly Fragrance Market is the property of your Tang family? Chun Chong Sheng looked at the incomparably humble steward in front of Tang 36 and asked in surprise, "Why have I never heard of this before?" Tang 36 replied, "It was only decided after the grand examination." Chun Chongsheng said, "I've heard that the four great markets of the capital all have extremely deep backgrounds. One of them even seems to be the property of the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance. Why would the previous owner of the Heavenly Fragrance Market be willing to act?" Everyone knew that the Winshui Tangs were the wealthiest clan in the world. The problem was the relationship between the Tang family and the Tianhai family had always been rather bad. In these past few years, the Tianhai family had always been secretly preventing the Tang family's influence from entering the capital. If the Heavenly Fragrance Market really did belong to the Tang family, then the Tianhai family's efforts would all be for naught. Therefore, he didn't quite understand how the Tang family had managed to do it. Tang 36 looked at him and smiled but didn't explain. Chun Chong Sheng felt somewhat baffled. The steward looked at Chun Chong Sheng, his expression also rather strange. He thought, if the Winshui Tangs hadn't placed such a heavy bet on you in the grand examination, how could the Heavenly Fragrance Market have lost to the point of being forced to change hands? He naturally didn't dare to say these words out loud. He looked at Tang 36 and asked, "Young master, according to the rules of the family, the money in the market cannot be touched. I can only bet all of your personal savings." Tang 36 calculated the amount and thought, even if he won, it still wouldn't be enough to buy Clear Lake Restaurant. He turned to Qin Changsheng and Xian Yuanpa and said, "How much money do you have? Give it all to me." He was borrowing money from others, so he naturally didn't need to write any IOUs. As for what he was borrowing money for, he didn't feel like explaining. He was borrowing money from others because he thought highly of them. Regrettably, these two schoolmates of his in the Orthodox Academy truly made him look down upon them in this aspect. Xian Yuan rummaged through his drawers and found 70 or so taels of silver. Qin Chongsheng was even more miserable. He rummaged through his entire body, but couldn't find even a piece of paper. Tang 36 was very sympathetic towards Xian Yuanpa, but he was extremely angry towards Qin Chongsheng. "Where are the silver notes I gave you? Where are the treasures Princess Luo gave you?" After the grand examination, the Orthodox Academy received so many gifts. Where did they go? Qin Changsheng was a little embarrassed. He said, "Those they were all left in the garden of Zhou." Tang 36 was very clear on how much wealth Qin Changsheng had before he went to the garden of Zhou, not to mention the boxes of silver notes. The treasures Luo Luo gave him made him a little envious. But in the end he actually lost them. Thinking about the destruction of the garden of Zhou and the loss of those treasures, Tang 36 felt even more pained. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said angrily, "What a waste." Qin Changsheng thought about the boxes and books in the depths of the lake in the garden of Zhou and also felt very regretful. He thought to himself that he had to find a way to get them back. In the past 2 days he tried a few more times, but after his divine sense passed through the ocean of sword intent, it still couldn't pass through the illusion of the black monolith. It seemed like finding the way back to the garden of Zhou would be a very long process. Xian Yuan suddenly thought of a problem. He looked at the manager of the Heavenly Fragrance Market, who was counting the silver, and asked Tang 36, "You want money to gamble?" Tang 36 said, "What else? Don't tell me you're going to prostitute." Xian Yuan shook his head and said, "My race said that humans are the most cunning. I can't gamble with you. I might as well keep the money and start a small business." As he spoke, he prepared to retrieve his silver tails. "What a stupid bear," Tang 36 said unhappily. "In just 2 days, 1 silver will become 11 silver. What kind of business is more worth doing than this?" Xian Yuan stopped and said with some surprise, "How could it be so much?" The demi-human race did not like gambling with humans, but that did not mean they did not gamble. Even the most simple and honest bear youth would at least understand something like odds. Tang 36 said, "The odds at the 4 great market, just calculated, the highest is 1 to 11, and the lowest is 1 to 9. Xian Yuan suddenly felt that something was wrong. He asked with some uncertainty, "Does that mean we'll win?" Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at an idiot. "Zhou Ziheng is at the star condensation realm and Qin Changsheng is at the ethereal opening realm. Do you think that the 4 great market will give Zhou Ziheng odds of 1 to 11? Xian Yuan was shocked and yelled, "You actually want to use my money to bet on Qin Changsheng?" It must be known that apart from the subsidy from the education board, the rest of the money was the hard-earned money he had washed dishes at the night market. How could he be willing to let this money go to waste? Tang 36 looked at him and sneered. "You have to understand, if you don't bet on him, he will use his status as principal to make things difficult for you and then report you to Her Highness. Luo Luo, what will you do?" Xian Yuan heard these words and felt helpless, feeling quite pained. The plum blossoms that filled the room were still blooming. It was as if the 4 seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter really existed between the simple walls. Regrettably, human life could not possess such a beautiful and mystical scene. Once one came to the cold winter, they could no longer return to spring. Mei Lisha's illness was already very serious. The affairs of the education board had all been handed over to his subordinates, and some of them had been handed over to Mao Qiuyu. In reality, he was very clear that he was not sick, he was just old. If it was an illness, it could be cured, let alone the one who was sick was him. As long as he was willing, all the teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green would come and perform the sacred light technique for him. No one could cure old age, not the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, not the Holy Maiden, not even the Pope. When one was old and about to return to the Sea of Stars, at times like these, different people would have different reactions. Mei Lisha had been in the Orthodoxy, studying scriptures and presiding over educational affairs. He had been alone for several hundred years. At times like these, what he liked the most was lively, especially lively related to Qin Changsheng and the Orthodox Academy. After hearing Priest Xian's account of what had happened this morning, the wrinkles on Mei Lisha's face smoothed out. He smiled and said, "How lively." As he spoke of how lively, A smile appeared on his aged face. Even those age spots seemed to have faded a little, but Priest Exayan could hear a hint of loneliness in his words. This made him feel very uneasy. The next chapter is before 12. Chapter 442. Priest Exayan suddenly felt that the plum blossoms in the room were emitting a chill, even though most plum blossoms like the cold. In order to drive away this coldness, he squeezed out a smile with some difficulty and continued to narrate the excitement of Orthodox Academy, especially focusing on the reaction speed of the 4 great markets after Chen Changsheng had represented Orthodox Academy in accepting the challenge, the pergola at the entrance of the 100 Blossom Lane, and the amount of money that had been endlessly congregated into the 4 great markets. It seems like there aren't as many bets as there were during the grand examination, Mei Li Sha said with a smile. Priest Exayan did not understand. The match between Zhou Ziheng and Qin Changsheng the next day would certainly attract a lot of attention. But how could it compare to the grand examination? In the next moment, he finally remembered something. During the grand examination, when no one was optimistic about Qin Changsheng's chances, he had bet his entire fortune on Qin Changsheng because His Eminence the Archbishop was optimistic about Qin Changsheng. "I understand," he said to the bishop with a smile. "I will ask someone to help me place the bet in a while." The entire Li Palace now knew, ever since Orthodox Academy had embarked on the road of revival, Minister Exan had become a trusted aide of Archbishop Mei Li Sha. His stance was the Archbishop's stance. For this year's grand examination, Minister Exayan had bet his entire fortune on Qin Changsheng. As a result, even if the clergy of the Education Board didn't think highly of Qin Changsheng, they still bet a lot of money on Qin Changsheng. This was a huge sum of money. Besides the Winshui Tang's calm and unyielding attack, the Heavenly Fragrance Market had lost so miserably in the end because they had to pay off all the money the Li Palace priests had won. Hearing Priest Exayan's words, Melisha laughed and then started coughing. The room echoed with painful coughs. After a long time, he finally stopped. He breathed a few times tiredly and looked at the sky outside the window. He said regretfully, "I originally wanted to see what level Qin Changsheng had reached. Unfortunately, I can't see it." For Qin Changsheng, tomorrow was the first time since the grand examination that he would be able to officially display his strength and level in front of the world. He had viewed the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books, held up the sky in the Garden of Zhou, carried Su Li on his back and fled the snowy plains of the land of demons, returned south in these past few days. All the things he had learned and experienced would be revealed tomorrow. He would present and report the results to those who cared about him. Tomorrow would be a brand new day for him. However, to Mei Lisha there was no tomorrow. Priest Exayan suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly. With great difficulty, he walked to the front of the couch and looked at the calm bishop. He was so nervous that he could not speak. The entire Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was quickly immersed in a tense atmosphere. A piece of news spread to all corners of the capital. The square in front of the Bureau of Traditional Education no longer had the bloodstains from last autumn, but the row of maple trees was as red as blood, as if the harsh autumn had arrived ahead of time. It turned out that dusk had arrived. No matter which interpretation it was inauspicious and sad. Since autumn had arrived, would the silent winter be far behind? With the arrival of dusk, wasn't the night just around the corner? When the night fell and the lanterns were lit, Chen Changsheng rushed to the Department of Traditional Education. He didn't have time to pay attention to the greetings of the priests and directly went to the deepest room. The room was still filled with plum blossoms, but many of them were no longer flourishing and were showing signs of withering. "I'm going to die." Mei Lisha looked at him and said. His voice was very gentle, as if he was afraid of scaring a child. Qin Changsheng had pondered over life and death countless times. There were many times when he thought he could see through life and death, such as in front of the Black Dragon or in the Garden of Zhou. He had even thought that he had understood some of the true meaning of life. For example, Those who were most afraid of death were often the least afraid of death. And in life, only by not being afraid of death could one not die. Only by staking one's life could one continue to live. But now, looking at the aged bishop, he suddenly realized that his views were still incomplete. This was because he had never thought if there was no enemy, or if your enemy was time, then how could you fight against it? When death approached, how could you remain calm? He didn't know, therefore, he didn't know what to say at this moment. Melisha looked at him and smiled. He didn't continue this topic and asked, "How confident are you tomorrow?" Perhaps it was because death was imminent and there was too little time. The bishop's words today were especially direct. Chun Changsheng was also very direct, without any hesitation. He said, 100%. Melisha thought that Chun Changsheng was trying to reassure him. He smiled and said, "I believe that you have actually thought many times why I am so good to you." Chun Changsheng was silent. He had obviously thought many times, but he couldn't come to a conclusion. He knew that it was definitely related to a very important matter, but he didn't want to think in that way. "There are some things that I am hiding from you, or even purposely deceiving you. But you must believe me. Believe His Holiness, believe your teacher." Melisha said, "Perhaps the truth of many things is different from what it seems on the surface, but that is only taking a different path. The final destination has never changed. Just like the arrangements we have made for you. In the future, perhaps you will feel dissatisfied or even angry, but you will have to see what the final result is. I believe that no matter what, it won't be bad for you." Chun Changsheng didn't really understand the meaning of these words, but he understood the bishop's meaning. These two meanings were different. As long as the result was good, then the process and methods used in the middle weren't important. This was what Melisha wanted to say, but was it in terms of heart or actions? Chun Changsheng looked at Melisha's aged face. He didn't want to think about this question anymore. He thought that for an old man who was about to leave this world, continuing to ask questions was a very cruel thing, and he could feel that this old man was truly thinking for his own good. In the eyes of the world, no matter if it was the Ivy League gathering or the grand examination, for Chun Changsheng to obtain the final victory and his name to shake the capital, the person that he and Orthodox Academy needed to thank the most was Archbishop Melisha. Before His Holiness personally placed the crown of thorns on Chun Changsheng's head, Melisha was the only person in the world that supported him. He was Orthodox Academy's greatest backer. He was obviously very close to Chun Changsheng. Only Chun Changsheng himself was clear. He and Archbishop Melisha hadn't even met face to face a few times. From Xining to the capital, everything had happened too quickly. Time had passed too quickly. In a moment of surprise, he and Orthodox Academy had come to this day, and Melisha was about to die. They hadn't known each other for long. They were separated by several hundred years, so they naturally couldn't be said to know each other. But he could feel that Archbishop Melisha was truly good to him, and was also very protective, as if he knew the greatest secret of his life. So when he looked at him, his eyes always carried an apologetic expression. All feelings were mutual. Currently, looking at him who was about to die, Chun Changsheng didn't know what he could do to help. He felt a little helpless, very apologetic, to the point that his eyes became moist. Melisha let Chun Changsheng leave, letting Minister Xan enter the room and take down a book from the bookshelf to read. In the last moments of his life, he was still reading. It was a scripture of the way with a rather old cover. He read for a very long time, then closed the book, looked out the window at the darkness, and murmured, "Principal Shang is truly an extraordinary person." Minister Xan didn't understand why, at this moment, His Eminence would think of that former principal of the Orthodox Academy, even though the Chun Changsheng he had just met was that person's student. Interesting. Melisha's withered finger tapped the scripture of the way twice, then said, "I'm very curious. How will the life of the next pope be recorded in the scripture of the way?" Minister Xan didn't understand, but he also didn't want His Eminence to be worrying about the important matters of the orthodoxy after his death. So he asked, "Sir, just who do you think will win tomorrow's battle?" This was to change the topic, and also because he was truly curious. It had nothing to do with his entire wealth, but he really didn't understand. In the grand examination, Chen Changxing's victory could be considered a miracle. He broke into ethereal opening on the spot, then used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to force Go Han Shi to forfeit. Only then did he obtain first upon the first banner. Tomorrow his opponent was the star condensation cultivator Zhou Ziheng. He couldn't possibly break into star condensation on the spot like in the grand examination. A miracle signified an extremely rare occurrence. If, in the short span of half a year, a miracle could occur twice, then it wouldn't be called a miracle, it would be called impossible. No matter how Minister Xen looked at it, he couldn't see that Chen Changsheng understood the possibility of defeating Zhou Ziheng. He wanted to know, did His Eminence truly believe that Chen Changxing would win, or did he just want to increase the youth's confidence in the final moment of his life to protect and escort him for a period of time? The petals gradually withered, but the plum branch remained firm and upright, even if it was twisted, even if the temperature in the room suddenly dropped, becoming bitterly cold. It still didn't show the slightest sign of breaking. Mei Lisha looked at the plum blossom pot on the table, smiled, and said, "I still favor Qin Changsheng." Qin Changxing sat in the hall. Luo Luo sat by his side. She didn't say anything, only holding on to his hand. The priest stood at a distance, not bothering them. People like Zhou Ziheng might sometimes forget that this youth was already the principal of the Orthodox Academy. But the people here couldn't possibly forget, and the current atmosphere was rather oppressive. After some time had passed, Qin Changsheng raised his head and realized that the hall was abnormally quiet. Those priests had gone off to some unknown place. An old man dressed in a hemp robe quietly stood in front of the mural in the hall. It was the Pope. This mural was very large, but it only depicted a plum tree. The fragrance of plum blossoms came from the bitter cold, whether it was the Orthodoxy South Stream Temple or the Mount Li Sword sect. When it came to educating the next generation, they all adopted this view. Qin Changsheng stood up and walked over, respectfully bowing. Then he asked a question that had troubled him for a very long time. Perhaps it was because tonight was a special night, or perhaps it was because Mei Lisha had been very direct with his words. But his question was very direct. Why did His Holiness suddenly change his view? The view here naturally referred to the Pope's view of the Divine Empress, of the imperial clan, and of the world. Chen Changxing looked into the depths of the hall and said, "It naturally can't be because of me, and I think that it shouldn't be because of him. I still favor Bayern Munich." Chapter 443. The great hall of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was very quiet. Luo Luo stood where she was, without coming over. The Pope calmly gazed at Qin Changxing and said, "Since it is a view of the world, then it can only be changed because of the world." Qin Changxing thought it over, then said, "I still don't understand." The Pope calmly said, "You don't need to understand. Old people like us have experienced far too many storms, seen far too many sunrises and sunsets. We've already become numb to many things. Many times, the way we view the world is rather boring. We don't mind using some methods that aren't very beautiful, even doing some things that go against our hearts, but many times we do these things not because we want to protect something, but because we clearly understand where our responsibilities lie." "Responsibilities?" Qin Changxing asked. "Yes, the longer one lives, the greater the responsibilities." The Pope said, "Our responsibilities towards this world, as time passes, grow heavier and heavier. We have the responsibility to seek a better future for humanity. For this, we can bear the stigma, we can disregard the price. In the past, I was enemies with your teacher, and now I am enemies with the Empress. It is all for this reason." Saying this, the Pope walked into the depths of the great hall, and then he never appeared again. Chen Changsheng and Luo Luo walked out of the great hall, down the stone steps, and came to the maple forest in front of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. In spring, the maple forest was green, but at dusk it was blood red. Now, in the darkness, it had become black. As it turned out, the so-called colors were all dyed by the heavens and earth. Not too long after, the heavy tolling of a bell resounded in the hall. The bell also rang in the Lee Palace. The ringing of the bell was the signal to return home. In the scriptures of the Orthodoxy, it had always been believed that the death of a person was not like the extinguishing of a lamp, but the soul would not remain in the present world, but would return to the sea of stars. Between the sea of stars and the night sky was the divine kingdom, the heavens, and even more, the eternal home. Archbishop Mei Li Sha's soul, in the instant the bell tolled, calmly left the mortal world, his soul returning to the sea of stars. There was no conspiracy, no grand and magnificent ending. He just calmly and normally followed the laws of life and departed, just like many ordinary old people. But in the end, he was no ordinary old man. He was the Orthodoxy's oldest and most senior archbishop of the Sacred Hall. He had seen 3 popes for holy maidens. He had seen Emperor Taizong. He had seen Zhou Dufu. He had seen Qin Xuanba. He had seen Wang Jitsa. He had seen life and death in the 100 Herb Garden. He had seen blood and fire in the Orthodox Academy. He had seen countless years. He knew countless secrets, and those years and secrets would be buried along with his departure. Hearing the bell, Qin Changsheng raised his head and looked at the night sky. He saw that the sky full of stars was either covered or separated by the leaves swaying in the wind. He did not know which star the bishop had, nor could he see it, but he knew that the star should be dimming at this time. If death was really the soul returning to the sea of stars, then why would that star dim? The bell continued to ring. A continuous stream of carriages arrived at the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education from all over Jingdo. The important figures all personally came to express their grief. Qin Changsheng stood in the forest and looked at these scenes without saying anything. He saw the head of the Tianhai clan. He saw Xue Xingchuan. He saw Mou. He saw Prince Qinlu, who was holding back his tears. He saw Su Shiji. He did not want to meet with these people. He held Luoluo's hand and walked through the forest. They arrived at a relatively secluded street and returned to the Orthodox Academy. This was the first time in a long time that Luoluo spent the night in the Orthodox Academy. Jin Yulu followed her and knew that tonight's situation was special, so he did not say anything. Qin Changsheng brought her directly to the lakeside and climbed up the great banyan tree. They sat side by side and looked at the stars in the sky and in the water, talking softly. He talked about many things, the events of Xining village, the events of the Garden of Zhou, the many dangerous and cruel things that happened on the way south. He did not tell her last time, but tonight he told her everything. Luo quietly listened and did not say anything. Ripening is a very difficult matter because it is very difficult to grasp the degree of maturity. Once the fruit is ripe, it is very easy to rot. Qin Changsheng said, "I still firmly believe that living should not be about fighting." After saying this, he let Luo go to sleep. He continued to sit on the great banyan tree, thinking about a few things. Su Li had taught him 3 swords. The intellectual sword was very powerful, all sorts of calculations and deductions, that was battle. The blazing sword was very powerful, all sorts of burning of life, that was battle. But the one he truly liked was still the stupid sword, because the stupid sword required courage and not battle. He only wanted to live. He had never thought about fighting. He did not like fighting, but to live, sometimes fighting was unavoidable, especially when you needed to bear responsibility. Up until now, he still did not know what kind of responsibility Archbishop Mei Li Sha wanted to bear, but he understood that attitude. He sat on the great banyan tree with his eyes closed, but he did not sleep for the entire night. At 5 in the morning, he opened his eyes, just like every other day, except that his eyes were bloodshot. He took 5 deep breaths, calmed his heart, and cleared his mind. He got down from the tree and walked a circle around the lake, stretching his somewhat stiff body. In the kitchen, he ate 2 bowls of Xianyuan post porridge, and even made an exception and ate half a salted duck egg. Today, there should be many people going to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to offer their condolences. "You will represent the Orthodox Academy," he said to Luoluo. Luoluo thought about today's battle and did not want to leave, but she could not resist Qin Changsheng's gaze, so she could only nod her head. The morning light gradually retreated, and the area outside 100 Flowers Lane gradually became lively. The temporarily erected awning was already filled with people. The best seats did not belong to the most powerful figures, but to the painters and storytellers of the 4 great markets. They were responsible for recording all the details of today's battle and then spreading it to the entire capital and the entire continent. Zhou Ziheng had already arrived. He stood in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, feeling rather regretful. To use a star condensation cultivation to challenge an ethereal opening youth was rather shameful no matter how one looked at it. But his opponent was still the principal of the Orthodox Academy. As a result, he believed that today's battle was certain to greatly increase his reputation. He dared not say how much it would increase his ranking on the Proclamation of Liberation, but at the very least, more people would know of his name. As a guest official, reputation was often more important than strength. If he wanted to use this battle to make his reputation even more resounding, he needed an audience, especially a very powerful audience, not those painters and storytellers. Regretfully, Archbishop Mei Li Sha had died last night. Those important figures that could have appeared would all go to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to offer their condolences. As a result, he felt rather regretful, even somewhat angry. You could have died any other time, so why did you have to die now? Today only this chapter because my mood is rather heavy. Tomorrow there will be 3 chapters because I have nothing to do, so I want a little bit more. Chapter 444. The clamor of people outside the Orthodox Academy was like a great cauldron with water boiling within. Around the pergola erected on the street outside 100 Flowers Lane, there were many shopkeepers and stewards busily accepting the bets of the populace. As long as the battle had not yet begun, one could place a bet at any time. But for some reason, the payout rates for both sides had not changed at all from yesterday to today. Not everyone liked to gamble. There were even more people of the capital who had purely come to watch the excitement. After all, this was a grand occasion. After Chen Chongqing had taken over as principal of the Orthodox Academy, he had entered the garden of Zhou. This was his first appearance after returning to the capital. Today was very important to him, and similarly, today was also very important to the Orthodox Academy. If it could be said that last year, Chen Chongqing becoming the first student of the Orthodox Academy in many years was more of a symbolic significance, then today's battle was the first battle in which the Orthodox Academy had truly reappeared in the world. If this was a story, then the following development would inevitably be Qin Changsheng obtaining victory, and the Orthodox Academy, which had been in ruins for many years, would announce its rebirth to the entire continent. Regretfully, everyone knew that today's story would not develop in such a way, because his opponent was a star condensation expert. The first battle of the Orthodox Academy's new students was highly likely to usher in a dismal conclusion. The crowd looked at the tightly shut gate of the Orthodox Academy, looked at the expressionless Zhou Ziheng standing in front of the gate, and felt many emotions. Everyone knew that the new rules of the all-school martial exhibition were a method by which the powerful figures of the Tianhai clan and the new faction of the Orthodoxy had joined hands to suppress the Orthodox Academy and Qin Changsheng. And then they thought of the legendary wolf, Youth Jishio, who was still imprisoned in Zhou prison. Behind this matter, they could see the unreachable figure of the Divine Empress. How could the Divine Empress give the Orthodox Academy any chance to truly mature? If there were no dissension within the Orthodoxy, perhaps the Li Palace would have responded even more strongly to this suppression, and the Orthodox Academy would not have been forced into such an awkward situation. It was a pity that even within the Orthodoxy, there were many people who were unwilling to see the Orthodox Academy truly revive. The 2 Sacred Hall archbishops who had proposed the new rules of the all-school martial exhibition had already declared their position to the entire continent. At the moment when the Pope had changed his mind, they still stood by the Divine Empress side. What made people sigh with sorrow was that these two Sacred Hall archbishops had grown into the current 6 prefects of the Orthodoxy under the Pope's meticulous nurturing, becoming 2 towering trees. It was also because of the Pope that they had come into contact with the Divine Empress. Now that the Pope had changed his position, he could not change the position of everyone in the Lee Palace. After all, the Lee Palace and the Divine Empress had been extremely close for over 200 years. How could they separate in a single day? Archbishop Melisha had died last night, and the Pope had lost his once strongest opponent, as well as his strongest comrade. Moreover, the Pope had to ensure fairness on the surface. No matter how many thoughts the Lee Palace had, it was impossible for them to side with the Orthodox Academy in front of the gazes of tens of thousands. Thus, no matter how difficult today's battle, no matter how dismal the outcome, it still had to be fought by the Orthodox Academy itself. In the past year, under the care of the Lee Palace, Qin Changsheng and the Orthodox Academy had not experienced many trials and had smoothly and healthily grown. Now, even if it was not their turn to shelter the Lee Palace from the storms, they would at least begin to share the storms with the Lee Palace. Of course, this was not fair. The majority of the people on the street thought this way. Through the register of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, the 4 great markets had long since confirmed to the entire capital that the Orthodox Academy currently only had 5 registered students. Princess Luoluo had a special status and could not represent the Orthodox Academy in this battle. Zheshio, who was considered by many to be the most valiant, was imprisoned in Zhou prison. Thus, when the other schools issued a challenge, the Orthodox Academy actually did not have much leeway to choose, or perhaps space to maneuver. There were no long-established experts or experts here, only young people. The gate of the Orthodox Academy was pushed open, and Qin Changsheng walked out, Xianyuan Pe and Tang 36 following behind him. The street was in an uproar and then quickly became quiet. For the first battle of the Orthodox Academy, the one to fight was naturally Qin Changsheng because he was the principal. Today he wore a brand new academy uniform. The stitches were fine and dense, the cuffs were neatly arranged, appearing very neat and tidy. His black hair was tightly tied up, his features were delicate, and he seemed very clean. Walking up to the academy gate, he bowed from a distance towards the inn in 100 Flowers Lane, then turned to Zhou Ziheng and nodded his head. Compared to his 16 years of age, he truly did seem a little too calm and steady, but he definitely did not have the slightest air of maturity or turbidity, giving off the feeling of a cool breeze. Just from his bearing, he truly did seem very much like a principal. Sincere praises could be heard from all around. The crowd that had come to see the excitement were unable to break through the imperial army and the palace clergy. They could only watch from a distance. They could not see clearly, but they increasingly felt that this young principal was very comfortable to look at. The matter of the entire capital surrounding and attacking the Orthodox Academy last spring had long since become a thing of the past. Archbishop Melisha was already dead. The bloodstains in front of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education were already gone. Who would still remember those things? After the grand examination, the mausoleum of books and the garden of Zhou, Qin Changsheng had long since become the pride of the great Zhou dynasty. The capital was the capital of the great Zhou. The Orthodox Academy was in the capital, so the people of the capital naturally considered it their pride. There were sighs of praise, discussions, and regrets. The people still felt that today's battle was unfair. The entire continent knew that Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong were the fastest cultivating geniuses in history to enter the upper level of ethereal opening. But in the end, it was still the upper level of ethereal opening. His opponent, Zhou Ziheng, was a true expert at the initial level of star condensation. To be able to surpass cultivation levels and obtain victory was already extremely rare, let alone today's battle. If Qin Changsheng wanted to win, he needed to surpass the gap of a large cultivation level. Just how high of a threshold was that? Last night, I heard from the receptionist of the Thousand Secrets Pavilion that in Xuanyang City, little Principal Qin did not retreat a single step before Lord Zhu Luo. Zhou Ziheng is only at the star condensation realm. So who says that he's definitely going to win? Correct. I also heard that in Xunyang City, little Principal Chen and that madman Xiao Zhang exchanged blows. Although he wasn't a match, he didn't suffer any major losses. Many discussions arose from the crowd. Somewhat unexpectedly, the vast majority were optimistic about Chen Changsheng, or perhaps it was not optimism, but some sort of emotional inclination. I beg all of you to understand that no matter how high little Principal Chen's performance in Xunyang City was, at the time he had Su Li and Wang Pei at his side, and the situation was chaotic. Right now it's one-on-one. Someone jeered. I'm not going to argue with all of you. If all of you really believe him, why don't you bet on the Orthodox Academy's victory? The crowd momentarily fell silent. As expected, they only hoped that Chen Changxing could win, not that they were truly optimistic. In reality, there weren't many people betting on the Orthodox Academy's victory. 1 to 11. There's really no way to bet on the Orthodox Academy. If it were some other upper-level ethereal opening cultivator challenging a star condensation cultivator, do you think those slyer-than-thieves would put out such odds? Let alone the fact that they've specially erected a pergola and arranged such a large array. In my view, the 4 great markets probably also believe that little Principal Chen will lose, but at least he'll be able to last for a very long time. Even if Zhou Ziheng is only at the initial level of star condensation, do you really think he'll need a very long time to defeat an opponent an entire level lower? Don't forget, when Wang Po was at the upper level of ethereal opening, how did he turn his initial level star condensation opponent into a madman? Although I also feel that little Principal Chen is very formidable, I don't believe that he can catch up to Wang Po. Don't forget, it was in that battle that Wang Po succeeded in breaking into star condensation. And don't forget, at the beginning of the year, it was also in the final match of the grand examination that little Principal Chen succeeded in ethereal opening. It's precisely because I haven't forgotten that I think it's impossible. It's only been half a year, so how could it happen twice in a row? Unless it's a miracle. The spectators engaged in spirited discussion, fiercely debating. Only the amount of money and the number of people wagered represented their true opinions. Just as the crowd had analyzed, no one, including the 4 great markets and many important figures of the capital, favored Chen Changxing. Even if Chen Changxing had already displayed his astonishing talent and battle prowess in the garden of Zhou and Xunyang City, that was because Chen Changxing was not the main character in the battle in Xunyang City, and the battles that had taken place before Xunyang City also had no spectators. The top floor of Clear Lake Restaurant had been cleared out today. Only one person was eating, because he had always felt that what was most needed to admire the lake was not the weather, but peace and quiet. It was currently summer, so it was naturally impossible for Clear Lake Restaurant's most famous crab feast to be served. However, the table was still densely packed with several dozen dishes, each dish probably more expensive than a year's worth of living for the common people. Such an extravagant person was naturally not an ordinary person. On the plate in front of Tian Hai Chenwu was a blue lobster from the great western continent. The lobster meat was as white as jade, yet it was even more tender and cold than jade. It had been cut into the shape of a chrysanthemum by the chef of Clear Lake Restaurant with exquisite knife skills. He picked up his chopsticks, but after a moment he shook his head and did not move. He had no appetite, because the dossiers in his hands and the descriptions of those bloody scenes were truly rather nauseating. These dossiers spoke of the battles between Chen Changxing and divine General Shui He, Liang Hongzhuang, and the great hero of the north, Lin Pingyuan. The first 2 battles had been personally narrated by Shui He and Liang Hongzhuang. In the final battle, because everyone had been killed by Chen Changsheng, the scene had been projected from the scene of the battle. After confirming something, Tian Hai Chenwu's mood was much better. He picked up his chopsticks again, picked up some lobster meat, and brought it to his lips. Slowly chewing, he felt a sweet taste enter his mouth. Without Su Li, how will you win? In the entire capital, no one favored Qin Chongsheng. The archbishop that favored Qin Chongsheng was currently peacefully sleeping in the plum blossoms. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education was in mourning, but many priests were looking in the direction of the Orthodox Academy. Luo Luo sat by the plum blossoms, representing the Orthodox Academy in fulfilling her duty. Suddenly, she heard a distant voice and walked to the window, gazing in the direction of the Orthodox Academy, her hands slightly clenched into fists. Teacher would definitely win, even if no one favored Chen Chongsheng. She still believed that Chen Chongsheng would obtain the final victory. There was no reason for that. At some point, MOU had arrived at the Orthodox Academy. She did not go to the gate of the Orthodox Academy to watch the battle. There were already many powerful figures there, and Xue Xingchuan was in that tea house. There was no need for her to go. For some reason, she had appeared in Chen Chongsheng's room. She did not sleep. She sat by the window, gazing at the lush and verdant forest of the Orthodox Academy, thinking about something. Suddenly, a boom came from the front courtyard. Her pupils constricted as she turned to the source of the sound. Just like this, the Orthodox Academy's first battle began without any warning. Zhou Ziheng attacked. Qin Chongsheng attacked. They each attacked. The Li Palace clergyman responsible for recording the scene stared intently. Several dozen painters and storytellers nervously watched. The several thousand people of the capital were absolutely silent. In various parts of the capital, there were even more people waiting to hear the latest news on this battle, to see the latest scene. The only ones that could do this were the 4 great markets. The painters with extremely deep skill and insight began to put their brushes to paper the moment Zhou Ziheng and Qin Chongsheng attacked, especially the painter from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. He himself possessed a cultivation at the star condensation realm. With a few careless brushes, a painting appeared on the paper. Although it was a sloppy scribble, it had already perfectly captured the trajectory and spirit of those 2 swords. After a while, this painting was transmitted through magical artifacts to various parts of the capital. This was a sketch, extremely sloppy and simple. If one did not know what it was, they would even think it was the work of a child who had just learned to write. The room was quiet. The students of the Heavenly Tao Academy surrounded the table, their minds filled with countless questions, but none of them dared to ask, afraid to disturb the person viewing the painting. No student of the Heavenly Tao Academy dared to approach that person, because of reverence, because of love, because that person was their senior brother, Guanbai. If Zhuang Huanyu, who had committed suicide a few days ago, was the pride of the Heavenly Tao Academy for the last 2 years, then Guanbai was the pride of the Heavenly Tao Academy for the last 10 years. Just like the other people on the Proclamation of Liberation, Guanbai also had his own title, famous name Guanbai. In the last few years, it was precisely him that had allowed the great name of the Heavenly Tao Academy to not fall. Guanbai's brows were like swords, slightly weathered. It was obvious that he had just returned from a distant place. When his gaze fell on that simple and sloppy piece of paper, it became even sharper, just like a real sword. His finger lightly traced the lines on the paper in the air, giving off a hissing sound. The edge of his finger seemed to be piercing through the air with sword intent. After some time, he drew back his finger, drew back his gaze, and gazed out the window in the direction of the Orthodox Academy. With a complex expression, he said, "A good sword." Finally, a student could not help but ask, "Senior, just who won?" These words instantly drew the gazes of his fellow students, all of them brimming with censure. The battle between Qin Chongsheng and Zhou Ziheng had just begun. This painting had only drawn the first sword of both sides. So how could it be used to determine who had won and who had lost? How foolish was it to ask such a question to disturb Senior Guanbai's viewing of the sword? Yet what the students of the Heavenly Tao Academy did not expect was that Guanbai really did make a judgment. He gazed at the lines on the paper, gazed at the ink that was about to congeal and the drag in the withered brush, and a sword glow suddenly flashed in his eyes. Then he said, "Qin Chongsheng won." I will write the next chapter as soon as possible.